I had been awake for 16 hours when they called me in. I'd spent the last of them signing off the night's repairs. A cracked aqueduct in the 3rd district, a road sinking near the east gate, a tunnel wall that would have buried a market by noon if I hadn't gotten to it. That was every night, 16 hours, every day of the year, one man holding up the works of a city of 1 million people, so the rest of them could sleep without ever wondering what kept the ground under their beds from moving. I told myself it was unreasonable. Then I did it anyway, because if I didn't, nobody would. Miles didn't look up when I came through the door. He told me, in the flat voice a man uses to cross a line off a list, that the Earth Magic Department was finished, abolished. He said the word the Assembly had settled on for it, and he said it without a flicker, the way you'd read a weather report. A budget waste. That was the phrase. I want you to sit with it the way I had to. Not a hard year, not a failure, not even a man who'd stopped being useful. Waste, as in garbage, as in the thing you scrape off the ledger to make the numbers look better. 9 years of my life had a name now, and the name was waste. I asked him if he had the first idea what the department actually did. What came apart in that city the day the last Earth Mage stopped showing up? He shrugged, like the question bored him. Everyone said it was waste, he told me. The Assembly had voted, and my salary was stopped as of that morning. That was the whole of it. No thanks, no pension, no pause. Then he pushed an envelope across the desk. My new posting, he said, almost pleasant about it. I opened it. Lord of Byram. Byram was a stretch of monster-choked wilderness at the Empire's edge. No people, no roads, no lord who had ever lasted a season. I stood there holding a promotion that was really a shovel to dig my own grave with. Resign in all but name, and save them the severance. I said as much out loud that this was just a nuisance being swept to the frontier. He waved me toward the door like you'd wave off a stray dog, still smiling. 9 years I'd carried their capital on my back. It took him under 2 minutes to set it down. The hallway did the rest of the work Miles had started. 2 combat mages by the pillars saw me coming with the envelope in my hand and didn't bother to lower their voices. The Earth Magic loser, one of them said. Island exile, said the other, and they both thought that was very funny. I kept walking. There's no answer you can give a room like that, so I didn't try to give one. Then the room changed. A woman came through the main doors and every head turned like they were on strings. Silver hair pulled up high, light armor, a golden bow slung across her back with a red stone burning at its grip. Sarah, guild branch master now, and once, a long time ago, the only student in that magic school who ever beat me to 2nd place. The mages who'd been laughing straightened up fast, suddenly very interested in the floor. She walked past all of them and stopped in front of me. Long time no see, Shade, she said, and there was nothing polite in it, just direct, the way she'd always been. I told her the news wasn't worth catching up over. She looked at the envelope, then at me, then quit. She said it like it was obvious. You never suited this place. Your talent's wasted on people who can't even see it. The guild takes anyone who can actually do the work, and it pays 10 times what these people ever gave you. An hour earlier, a man had called me garbage to my face, and the whole hall had agreed with him. Now the one person in the Empire everyone in that room wanted to impress was standing in front of me saying my talent was too good for them. I didn't know what to do with that. It didn't fix anything, but it was the first thing in 9 years that felt like being seen. Behind her, the mages were staring like I'd grown a second head. One of them mouthed the words, "Why is Sarah talking to him?" She reached out and took my arm to steer me toward the door, already deciding for me. I planted my feet. "Wait," I said, "not like this. Give me a night to think." For a second, something crossed her face. Disappointment, maybe, that I hadn't just followed. Then she let go and stepped back with a small smile. "Fine, I'll wait." She turned to leave, and on the way out, her eyes swept over the crowd and landed on Miles, who drifted in at the edge of it. She didn't say a word to him. She just looked at him the way you'd look at something scraped off a boot and moved on. I watched the chief's face go red to the ears in front of everyone. It was the only good thing that happened to me all day. That night, I lay on my bed and let the ceiling ask the questions. Adventurer. The word didn't fit in my mouth. I'd never swung a sword in my life. My whole talent lived in stone and dirt and the slow craft of holding things up. Following Sarah into a guild party felt like trading one master for another, and I'd had enough of masters. I got up and stood at the window with a cigarette, looking out over the capital. 5 and 6 stories of it, streets glittering with lamplight, the leftovers of a rich empire that had lost its war across the sea and was spending down what shine it had left. Cost-cutting had eaten my department one slice at a time until only I was left, and now the last slice too. The whole glittering view was just a fight over who grabbed the last of the remnants. 2 roads, serve the state as lord of a wasteland nobody wanted, or go free and carry someone else's luggage. And then, staring at all those lights, it hit me like a struck match. For 9 years, I'd poured everything I had into holding up someone else's city. Every road, every bridge, every stone of it belonging to men who just called me garbage for the trouble. I'd used my magic to repair, only ever to repair, to patch and prop up what other people had built and other people owned. But repair and build are the same craft pointed in different directions. And now they'd handed me land, empty, lawless, mine, a whole region with no roads to mend because there were no roads at all. They'd handed me raw ground and the one magic in the world made to raise a city out of nothing, and they'd done it by accident, thinking they were throwing me away. Nobody was watching Byram. Nobody would ride out to interfere with a place they'd already crossed off the map. Whatever I made there, I'd make owing them nothing. So I'd build my own, not repair theirs, mine, from the bare rock up. A city that answered to no chief and no assembly, that fed itself and armed itself and stood on its own until the day the men who threw me out had to look at it and understand exactly what they'd deleted. I stood there a long time after the cigarette burned down. For the first time in years, the exhaustion under my ribs felt like something other than defeat. The next day, I walked into the Border Territory office and told the clerk I was there to accept the Byram posting. He blinked at me like he'd misheard. Byram? Someone actually wants it? He shuffled the papers and let out a tired laugh. You do know what this is, right? It's the classic trick. They hand you a job so miserable you resign on your own, and the state never has to pay you a copper of retirement. Nobody takes these. I said I'd take it anyway. He studied me for a moment, then shook his head and reached for the stamp. You're every bit as strange as the rumors say, he muttered, and slid the territory documents across the counter. I picked them up. Byram was mine now, on paper and in law. I walked out with a wasteland in my hands and a plan nobody else could see. She was waiting by the bulletin board when I came down the corridor. The new appointment was already posted there for the whole court to read, Shade, Lord of Byram, and she was standing under it with her arms crossed and her back half turned. I said her name. She didn't turn around. I heard, she said. So you took the safe demotion. Stability over dreams. Her voice had gone cold and flat. I told you I had no interest in a man who won't bet on his own dreams. I meant it. She thought I'd folded. Everyone did. I told her to wait before she wrote me off, and then I told her the truth. The thing I hadn't said to Miles, or the clerk, or anyone. I wasn't going to Byram to fail quietly. I was going to build a city from scratch, raised out of the wasteland with my own magic. Food, iron, walls, all of it, needing nothing from the Empire and nothing from the Talgar Federation across the sea. The strongest frontier on the map. Strong enough that one day both of those nations would have to look at it and know exactly who they'd thrown away. She turned around at last, and then she laughed, short and disbelieving, and told me a fantasy, like that wasn't a dream, it was a delusion. So I gave her a reason to believe it. I let the corridor go quiet, and I said it plainly, one line at a time. Then let's make it a bet, I said. If I turn Byram into the strongest frontier, you marry me. She went still. And if I fail, I said, I'll become your subordinate, your adventurer, carrying your luggage for the rest of my life, and I'll never say a word about dreams again. That's the wager. Your call. I meant every part of it, and she could hear that I did. That was the whole trick of it. I wasn't asking her to believe in the city. I was asking her to believe in me and staking everything I had left on the answer. For one whole beat, she didn't move. The color climbed up her neck and she looked down at the floor. And for that moment, the confident guildmaster was gone, and she was just a woman weighing something that mattered. The silence stretched until I could hear the court murmuring somewhere far off, until I started to wonder if I'd read her wrong my whole life. Then she crossed the space between us, pressed one hand flat against my chest, and looked up at me with the old fire back in her eyes. Fine, she said. I'll take that bet. A breath, and then quieter, almost a warning. Don't you dare lose it. I didn't plan to. I had a wasteland, my magic, and for the first time, a reason bigger than spite to raise something out of the dirt. The Empire had written me off as waste. Standing there in that corridor with her hand over my heart, I made myself a promise that I'd spend the rest of my life turning that one word into the strongest thing they'd ever seen, and let them choke on it. The signboard said Byram Region starts here, and whoever painted it had been generous with the word region. Past it, there was rock, then more rock, then a smear of brown dirt that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a hill. and behind that, nothing a man would walk toward on purpose. A month by ship and carriage, then 7 days on foot through the forest to arrive here. I stood at the sign and let the emptiness get its first look at me. "There's really nothing here," Sarah said. She said it the way you'd read a number off a page. No complaint in it. "No," I said, "there isn't." She'd given up a guildmaster's post to stand next to me in front of that sign. I'd told her twice on the road it wasn't too late to go back. Both times, she'd told me she'd already meant to quit, that following my gamble was her choice. And both times, she'd said it before I finished the sentence. I let it go. A man can only offer a door so many times before offering it again is its own kind of insult. She went still then, the way a hunter goes still, her chin lifted. "Undead," she said. "They're under the ground. In the light, they stay down." She nodded at the long shadows already pooling in the low rock. "After dark, they come up. How many? Enough that we don't find out the hard way." She unslung the golden bow off her back, the red stone at its grip catching the sun. "Keep a fire burning tonight. We take the dark in shifts." "There won't be a dark to sit through," I told her. "I'll have somewhere safe before the sun's down." She looked at me, then at the flat brown nothing, then back. She didn't call it a lie. She just decided not to argue about it yet, which from Sarah was close to a blessing. "I'm good at finding things," she said. "Water, meat, whatever's out there. Leave that to me." And she went, not walked, ran, low and smooth over the broken ground like a track runner off the line, the bow riding her shoulder. In a few breaths, she was a shape, then a shimmer, then gone into the heat. That left me, the sign, and the whole worthless country the Empire had thrown at me to make me quit. "Right," I said, to no one. "Let's see what worthless is worth." I held out my hand and called it up. The golden pickaxe came the way it always did, a shape of light hardening into weight, a T-headed tool the color of old coin, warm to the grip. Super S-rank earth magic, they'd said, back when they still bothered to rank me. The one department the Empire had cut down to a single man and then cut him too. The tool didn't care what they'd called it. It only wanted rock. I set it against the nearest outcrop and swung. There was no chip, no spray of gravel. The stone came apart clean and simply wasn't there anymore, gone into the pickaxe's own space. A store I couldn't see but could feel, a count ticking up quietly in the back of my head. One swing. A slab of rock the size of a cart. Gone. Filed away as so many units of stone. I swung again. The count climbed. I found a rhythm and stopped thinking about it. Swing, gone, count. Swing, gone, count. What would have taken a quarry crew a season took me the space of an afternoon snack, and my arms barely knew they were working. Then a point in the rock lit up. Just for me, a small sparkle down in the gray, the way a coin catches a candle. The pickaxe's guide, marking something worth marking. I swung through it and the count in my head grew a new line. Crystal. A few strikes later, another glint, a different weight to it. Silver. Then copper. Then a dull warm spark that read as magic stone. And after that, 2 finds. I stood and looked at for a second longer than the rest. A stone that hummed faint against my palm before it vanished into store, thought stone, and a curl of something ancient and heavy, the fossil of some demon beast dead longer than the Empire had been alive. Worthless land. I almost laughed. They'd surveyed this place with the smallest budget they had and written it off, and here it was, handing me silver and old magic out of the first hillside I hit. I stopped counting the treasures and went back to the work. I widened out, took the whole rise down, then the ground under it, chewing a flat square out of the wasteland one clean bite at a time. 100 paces by 100 paces, I decided. Big enough to matter, small enough to close. By the time the light started to lean, I had it. A level plain of bare-packed ground where an hour before there'd been broken hills, and a store in my head so full of stone I'd stopped reading the number. Mining was only ever the first half of earth magic. The old mages had dug, and then they'd learned to build with what they dug. I'd never laid a single wall in my life. I put the pickaxe away and got ready to find out if the second half came as easy as the first. I cast the workbox. An interface came up in front of me, a pane of clear light hanging in the air where only I could read it. 4 ways in, a catalog of everything the pickaxe had eaten, a way to study a material down to its grain, a way to reshape it, and a way to build the shape you'd made straight into the world. I opened the catalog first. Stone in the thousands, raw earth in the tens of thousands, wood only over 100, a small number next to the rest, and I noted it and moved past it. Under those, in their little amounts, the finds: crystal, silver, copper, iron ore, magic stone, thought stone, the demon beast fossil, a frontier lord's whole treasury, dug out of ground nobody wanted, filed in a window in my head. I took stone first, held the idea of a slab in my mind, flat, wide as a big bed, thick as my fist, and told the material to become it, and then to come forth. The word left me, and the slab was simply there on the ground at my feet, solid, cold, real. I laid them like a man setting tiles for a giant. One, then the next, then a row, then a field of them, edge to edge across the whole 100 paces, until the bare dirt was gone under a floor of fitted stone. Sarah had said the dead came up out of the ground. Let them try to come up through that. I jumped on it, both boots, hard. It didn't give, solid. Then the walls. I made the blocks bigger, each one the size of a full-grown cow, squared off true, and I stacked them, not by hand. I set the first course around the whole edge of the plane and grew the wall up out of it, course on course, higher than a man, then twice that, then higher still, up to about 5 times my own height before I let it stop. A gray stone rampart standing where the wind had been. I left 2 gaps, east and west, and hung gates in them. Wood I could spare, swung on copper hinges with copper screws, the metal bright against the timber. I heaved on each one. They held, heavy and sure. I stood in the middle of it then, inside my own walls, on my own floor, in the last strong gold of the afternoon, and I felt the size of what I'd already done press in without ever quite letting myself say it out loud. A house next. The people I meant to fill this place with would want more than a wall. I marked out the footprint, 40 paces one way, 30 the other, and stepped it out with smaller blocks for a foundation. Up went the pillars, across went the beams, walls between them, a second floor riding overhead, with part of the ceiling left open to the sky, room for the thing to breathe. It rose fast under the come forth word, faster than any crew of men could raise a shed, a 2-story house, standing where an hour ago there'd been a level of naked stone. And then the sun told me it was nearly out of patience. The gold went out of the light and the red came in, low and fast, the way it does at the end of a day when you've spent all of it. I was up on the roof frame with the wood, and the catalog number I'd walked past all afternoon was suddenly the only number that mattered. Wood, over 100, and dropping with every beam. Enough, barely enough. I laid the frame and told myself so under my breath. Barely, barely. And out past the walls, the light kept bleeding out of the world. Undead come up in the dark. I had a floor they couldn't rise through, and walls they couldn't climb, and a roof with a hole in it, and a fistful of timber left, and a sky the color of a cut going black at the edges. I stopped thinking in sentences. I said a beam, reached for the next, said it. The store of wood ticked down toward nothing, and the sun slid down to meet it, and it became a plain race between the two. My hands against the horizon. Last beam. I held it over the last gap with the count in my head, reading almost empty, and the sky reading almost night. Make it, make it. I set it home. The roof closed. The count hit its floor with just enough to have finished and not a stick more. And the sun went under the edge of the world and left the whole red sky to me, sealed in under a roof I'd pulled out of empty rock between one snack and one sunset. I stood up on the frame in the last of the light and lifted both hands over my head. I didn't shout. I'm not built to shout, but I held them up there a moment against the red, alone, on top of a fortress that hadn't existed when the day started. A walled fort, gated east and west. A 2-story house standing in the yard. A floor no dead thing could climb through. And I let myself have it. Made it. Somewhere they were still calling that pickaxe a waste. Let them. I looked down at what Worthless had built in an afternoon and thought they should come and see it, and knew they never would, and found I didn't mind either way. Then the first howl came out of the dark past the walls, and I remembered I still couldn't fight. Sarah came back through the east gate just after full dark, a firebore slung over her shoulders, and stopped dead 3 steps inside. She looked at the walls. She looked at the house. She looked at the floor under her boots, then up at the roof I'd closed against the sky, and then at me. Sitting by the fire, I'd started to prove her right about the fire. You built a castle, she said, in an afternoon. I built a house with a wall around it. I nodded at the boar. You found dinner. I found several things. She swung the boar down and set to it, quick and sure with a knife, the way she did everything. The house I did not expect. The steak went over the fire, and the yard filled with the smell of it, fat spitting into the flames, the first honest good thing that day had produced. We ate with our hands. It was very good, and neither of us said much until the edge was off the hunger. There's water east of here, she said at last, wiping her hands. A swamp. Bad water. Dark, but water. Runs for a way. That woke me up. Bad water could be cleaned. A swamp could be drained. Drain it. Purify what's under it. And you had the one thing 100 paces of stone couldn't give you: soil, fields, food that didn't have to be hunted at the point of her arrow. I want it, I said. Farmland. If I can pull the fowl out of that water, we could grow here. She didn't say no. What she said was worse. Then you'll have to reach it, and you can't. Not alone. She looked at me across the fire, blunt. No teasing in it now. The undead only rise at night. The beasts don't keep hours. Wolf things, worse things. Day and dark both. Between here and there. I can pass through them. You'd be dead before the swamp. She let that sit. You put up a fort in an afternoon, and you'd lose to the first pack on the road. Beyond the wall, on cue, the howls rose. Several throats, close, moving. The fire jumped. I looked at the gate, solid on its copper hinges, and understood exactly what she was telling me. I could build anything. Behind these walls, I was the most useful man in the empire, and it didn't matter, because the walls stopped at the walls, and everything I wanted was on the other side of them, in the dark, where a boy could kill me. A fort you can't leave is a nicer kind of cage. So I get strong enough to walk out of my own gate, I said. Sarah watched me over the fire a moment, then went back to the meat, which from her meant yes. Outside, the pack kept its distance and kept its voice, and I sat inside the impossible thing I'd made and started, quietly, to work out how a man who couldn't fight was going to become one who could. I built a staircase before I built a plan. The workbox ran a flight of stone steps up the inside of the wall, and I climbed to see what kept howling at my gate all night. There were more than 10 of them gathered at the foot of it, rattling skeletons, and hunched gray things Sarah named as ghouls. The skeletons want to crawl into a living body, she said. The ghouls just want to eat one. A city boy doesn't see much of either. I'll confess I took a step back. Sarah didn't. She drew the golden bow, tucked her hair behind her ear, and sent a single arrow of light down into the crowd. The skeleton it struck didn't fall. It came apart into a soft glow and sank into the dirt. That's experience, she said. Beat a monster, the spirits hand you a little of it. Collect enough, and you climb a level. I ran a status check on myself. The plane spell they teach at magic school. It was humbling. Level 1. More magic packed into me than I knew what to do with. Wrapped around a body a strong breeze could bully. 2 experience points to my whole name. Earned, if you must know, by stepping on a slime when I was a boy. So I tried her way first. I made a bow out of the box in about a minute. Wood and fiber and a copper head. And I shot down at the skeletons. I missed. I missed the next one too. I missed things standing perfectly still that had done nothing to deserve being missed. You're not built for archery, Sarah told me. She didn't dress it up. She never does. Fine. Aim wasn't mine, but weight was, and a magic that could put it exactly where I wanted. I opened the box in the air above a skeleton and called up a block, a slab of stone the size of a cow, born from nothing over its skull. It dropped. One thump, and there was one less skeleton on the ground. You did it, Sarah clapped once. I knew you would. It's not exactly elegant, I said, and did it again and again. I thumped my way through that crowd a good 10 times, until a little fanfare rang out of nowhere, and the status told me I'd reached level 2. The gains were modest. I'd have kissed the numbers anyway. The last few skeletons worked out that standing near my wall was fatal, and started backing into the dark. I turned for the stairs to go after them. Sarah caught my sleeve. Your level is 2. Walk out there with your defense, and something will take your head off. She let go. We wait, they get careless, and we do this again. She was right, and I hated that she was right, because do this again sounded like a great many nights of standing on a wall dropping rocks by hand. There had to be a faster way to get strong than this. I went to bed turning it over. The next morning, I stopped trying to fight the wasteland and started reading it. The workbox has 4 uses. It catalogs a material, analyzes it, edits it, and builds from it. I'd only ever bothered with the first and the last, so I ran an analysis on a scoop of the local soil, and the box told me exactly why the dead kept crawling out of it. The dirt here was about 7 parts in 100 something it named grudge element. In darkness, that element spawns undead. The land itself was manufacturing the monsters. That was a problem I could edit. I stripped the grudge out of one batch and got clean earth, safe to build a town on. Then, I did the opposite. I concentrated it, packed it up to 70 parts in 100, as high as it would go before the effect broke, and made soil that would spit out skeletons on command, in daylight or dark, as much as I asked. Then, I built it a room to do it in. A sealed stone box, 20 paces by 20, floored with the cursed dirt, a smaller arena beside it, and a door to feed the monsters through one at a time. I killed them as they came. It worked. It also bored me stupid, and level 4 to level 8 crawled past while the experience I needed kept climbing out of reach. So I stopped standing in the room. I built 3 towers instead, each one a spawning box on top and a deep pit beneath, and I let the monsters walk out and fall. Dead at the bottom. Experience to me, no sword, no sweat. I sat in the sun and watched a machine make me stronger while I did nothing at all. You think of the most outrageous things, Sarah said, shaking her head up at the towers. By the time I called it enough, I was level 13. We opened the east gate and walked out into the country I hadn't been able to survive a week before. It showed. A goblin mage threw fire at us, and I dropped a block on it without slowing down. An orc came next, then a poison slime, then a fireboar. They arrived one after another, and not one of them lasted longer than it took to notice it. Sarah barely lifted the bow. Most of the time I killed with one hand, while the other kept the pickaxe working, because the ground out here was rich. The golden pickaxe kept flagging glowing rock as we passed, and I pulled it up without breaking stride. Iron ore, magic stones, silver, and once a great fossil, the guide called an ancient magic beast. All of it swallowed into storage while I walked. The iron I couldn't use yet. Unlike copper, it wants smelting into steel before it's good for anything. I filed that away and kept moving. By midday, the footing turned soft and the air turned foul. We came out on the shore of a lake, a big one, and every drop of it the color of old tea, thick and dead and still. Sarah wrinkled her nose. Can farmland even use water like this? Not like this, I said. So I'm going to take all of it out. I set the pickaxe to the surface and told it the water was a material. It began to drink. Not a splash, not a drain hole. The whole lake started to sink at once, an inch, then a hand's width. The dirty water lifting away into storage as cleanly as I'd stripped stone out of a hillside. Sarah stood at the edge and watched the shoreline crawl backward away from her boots. I can't believe it, she said, mostly to herself. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of a lake quietly ceasing to exist while she gave up being astonished and just sat down on a rock to watch it go. When the pickaxe had drunk the last of it, there was no lake at all. There was a wide muddy bowl, glistening and reeking under the gray sky, and things flopping across the bottom of it. Fish. The pickaxe takes water and mud and stone, but it won't touch anything alive. So every fish in that lake was left stranded in the muck. Most were ordinary. Some were not. Bloated magical things that were the real reason the water had gone rotten in the first place, and those had to come out by hand, one at a time. So we waded in. Sarah shrieked the first time the mud swallowed her boot to the ankle. She shrieked louder when something slick slid past her leg under the surface. And then, somewhere in the middle of it, elbow deep in filth, hunting poison fish barehanded with her hair coming loose. The composed S rank, who'd corrected my archery, simply vanished, and a girl having the time of her life took her place. Shade, I got another one! She held a fat wriggling fish up over her head like a trophy. Mud to her shoulder, a brown streak dashed across one lens of her glasses. I was no better off. We caught the magical ones and destroyed them, carried the ordinary fish over to a little pond I'd scooped out to the side to keep them alive, and by the end, we were both of us caked head to boot, unrecognizable, standing in the bottom of a drained lake grinning at each other like a pair of fools. I looked at her, silver hair gone mud brown, glasses filthy, laughing, and I laughed too, out loud. I don't do that often. I noticed myself doing it and let it happen anyway. Then I finished the job. I pulled the last of the mud up into storage, opened the workbox, and set the edit running across every drop of dirty water I'd taken. Dirty water in, clean water out. The box changing the thing itself, not straining it until the whole store of it came up pure. Then I gave the word. Come forth. A block of clean water the size of the house came into being high over the empty bed and let go all at once. It fell as a single flat white waterfall, roaring down into the bowl, and the lake refilled in the space of a few breaths. Clear now, bright, catching what little light the sky had. The wave of it rushed out to the banks and washed straight over the two of us where we stood, and 2 hours of mud went off us in one cold shock of water. Sarah came up gasping, clean again, silver hair plastered flat to her face, and she looked out at the new lake and then at me, and for once, she didn't say anything clever at all. I had my clean water. The farmland could come next. We'd only just gotten back from the lake, mud still drying on my boots, when someone knocked on the west gate. Not the east gate, the one that faced my own land, the west one, the one that faced the rest of the world, and that nobody had ever once had a reason to knock on. Sarah went still with a fireboar leg half dressed in her hands. An hour before, she'd warned me the monsters got braver once the sun went down, and now, here was a sound in the failing light. 3 even raps and a pause, patient, deliberate. She set the knife on the stone. Be careful, Shade, she said under her breath. It could be bandits. I climbed the stair I'd cut into the inside of the wall and came up over the top ready for men with blades. There were no blades. There were about a dozen people standing in the dirt below the gate, and every one of them was starving. Men, women, children, thin in the way that isn't a diet, or a hard season, but the real thing, cheeks gone hollow, clothes worn down to the gray color of the road itself. They didn't rush the wall. They didn't beg. They just stood, looking up at me like they weren't quite sure I was a real person, and not one more thing the road had made them imagine. A bearded man stepped out to the front. He was as gaunt as the rest, but he held his back straighter, and there was something clear and steady in the way he looked up at me. "Are you the lord of this fortress?" he asked. I told him I was. Lord of the Byram region, more or less. The word did something to all of them. They bowed, the whole group, at once, the smallest children copying the grown ones half a beat behind. And the sight of it pulled something tight in my chest. People that hungry, bending that low, over a word like Lord, over me. The bearded man kept his eyes down while he explained. They'd lost their living in the capital, he said. They'd walked from region to region since, going door to door looking for work, and been turned away at every one of them. The children hadn't eaten in 3 days. He said it flat and level, the way a man says a thing he's already said to too many closed gates to have any feeling left over for it. Then he turned and pointed back across the forest, to the one thing you could see from miles out in that wasteland, the great tower I'd raised to pull experience out of the dark while I slept. A couple of the younger ones behind him found their voices at that, murmuring that they'd spotted it clear over the tree line, that they'd never seen anything so tall. A structure that big, the bearded man said, meant somebody out here was building something, and where a thing was being built, there might be work. I stood up on that wall a moment and didn't answer, because I knew this. The Empire had a word for me once too, budget waste. They'd crossed my name off a list in the same bored voice you'd use to cut any line of an accounts book, and then they'd ship me to the emptiest corner of the map so they wouldn't have to look at me again. And here, at the bottom of that same map, stood the people the capital had done the exact same thing to. Capable, decent people it had decided it couldn't afford, walking until their kids went quiet and stopped asking for supper. The man had a good head on him. I could see it in 10 seconds of listening to him. The kind of man who'd run something once and run it right before the capital decided he was one more cost to cut. And the Empire had thrown him out onto a road to die with his grandchildren. I found I could not do to them what had been done to me. "There's work," I called down, and my voice came out of me louder than I meant it, cracking off the stone. "Plenty of it right here. Get inside, all of you." And I threw the gate open. They didn't move at first. They just stared through the gap at the courtyard beyond it, at the walls and the tower and the warm light, like people who'd been told no so many times they no longer knew what a yes was supposed to look like. Then the bearded man made a small sound in his throat and stepped through, and the rest came after him in a slow flood. The children first, and something in me eased that I hadn't known was clenched. Down below me on the wall, Sarah had come up quiet at my shoulder. She'd been the one calling bandits an hour ago. Now she watched them file in past the open gate and didn't say a word, just glanced sideways at me once with a look I couldn't name and didn't ask about. Inside, I put Sarah on the food and took the bath myself. The tub was a heavy stone thing built against a furnace, and until this week, it had been dead weight. A bath with no water is just a cold box, but I'd hauled a whole lake's worth of clean water home as raw material 2 days back, and now I could call up as much of it as I liked. I filled the tub, lit the furnace under it, and told the whole crowd the same thing I'd have wanted told to me. Go wash, get warm, and everything else can wait until you're clean. Most of them went gratefully, in shifts, sinking into hot water for what looked like the first time in a long time. One of them refused. A small boy planted both feet at the edge of the tub and announced to the entire room that he was not, under any circumstances, going to take a bath. His mother caught his arm and hissed his name at him, Todd, and told him to stop being selfish, which is the single thing that has never once worked on a child of that age in the history of children. I started toward him, fully intending to do it the simple way, and just lift him in by the collar. Sarah got there first. She went down on her heels in her apron so she was level with him, and told him, easy as anything, that she was cooking something very good tonight, and that it was the clean boys who got a share. The tantrum evaporated. He looked at the water as if going in had been his own brilliant idea, and he marched after his mother without another word. Sarah stood back up and caught my eye. I decided this was not the moment to mention that my own plan had involved a collar. Washed and warm, all 12 of them gathered at the long table, and Sarah brought out the food. It was meat mostly. That was the one thing this land handed me in more than I could ever eat. Firebore, and whatever else the eastern wilds threw at me, roasted and stacked high. Out here, everything green was hard to come by, and everything with 4 legs was easy, so meat was what there was, and there was plenty of it. I've watched hungry people eat before. This was something else. For a long while, nobody nobody at that table said one word. They ate like they didn't quite trust the food to still be there if they looked away from it. Heads down, both hands going, reaching for the next piece before they'd finished the last. A couple of the grown men were crying while they chewed, turning their faces and wiping it off quick, ashamed of it, not stopping. And the little one who'd fought the bath so hard it ate until his eyes went heavy and he tipped over sideways against his mother, warm and full and dead asleep before the plates were even cleared. The bearded man ate slower than the others. He kept looking down the table at them, at the young ones, at the sleeping boy, and every time he did, his jaw worked like he was holding something back, and he'd make himself pick up his fork again. A man counting heads. A man who'd spent a month watching those same heads go hungry and had just now, tonight, stopped. I gave them rooms when it was done. The fort had always had far more space than it had people. Tonight, for the first time, that gap started to close. Late, when the house had finally gone quiet, the bearded man came to find me. Washed and rested, he didn't look like a beggar off the road anymore. He looked like what he'd been before all of it. A solid man somewhere in his late 40s who'd once had things to be responsible for. He gave me a proper formal bow, and at last, his name, Marlin, head of the family. It had been a full month, he said, since any of them had had a real bath or a plate they didn't have to ration. And he asked me, straight out, how a man could ever begin to thank me for it. I lit a cigarette and figured I owed him the truth, since he'd given me his. That work I shouted about, I said. I oversold it. He waited, saying nothing. So I told him plainly. There was work. The territory needed 100 things it couldn't yet make for itself. That part was real, but I had no money to pay for any of it. None at all. Not one note of imperial bond to press into a man's hand at the end of a week's labor. I'd stood on my own wall and bellowed plenty of work at a starving family, and the plain fact sitting underneath it was that I was flat broke. So you mean? Marlin said slowly, working it out. Payment in kind, food, a roof over your family, tools I forged for you with my own 2 hands. I looked at him through the smoke. I won't do you wrong, I promise you that, but I can't pay you the way the capital would have. In the end, it comes down to one thing, whether you can trust me. There was a piece of it I didn't say out loud. The Empire's money was paper the capital printed, and the capital was rotting from the middle out. I'd spent 9 years inside it, watching it decide line by line what it would stop paying for. And one of the things it had finally decided to stop paying for was me. I had no intention of building a place that lived or died on that paper. I wanted to build one that owed the Empire nothing at all, that grew its own food, dug and forged its own iron, made its own worth straight out of the ground, so that on the day the capital finally choked on its own ledgers, not one person sleeping under my wall would feel the wind of it. It was a heavy thing to hang on one tired man saying yes. Marlin didn't make me wait for it. He drew himself up and told me he'd wanted to serve me from the moment the gate swung open, that a lord who fed strangers' children before he ever asked what those strangers could do for him was a lord worth following, coin or no coin. Then he bowed one more time and went off to bed. I sat there a while after he'd gone, the cigarette burning down between my fingers, and I listened to the house. 12 more people breathing in it than there had been that morning. I'd spent my whole life being the thing the Empire threw away. Now I was standing in the place that caught what it threw. I didn't have a single coin to my name. I don't think I'd ever felt richer. I went back to the lake alone and started tearing a field out of the ground. The plan was simple. A town eats before it does anything else, and Byram had never grown a thing. So I dug a square 1,000 steps on a side, down to 5 times my own height. The pickaxe, throwing up stone and dead gray dirt until the pit was deep enough to swallow the fort whole. Then I fixed the part that mattered. The soil here was barren, the kind of ground that starves whatever you put in it. I opened the workbox, took the dead dirt apart, and put it back together at 80% fertility. Around here, 5% was considered rich land. The old empire had cut its farms to the bone, shrugged, and said if there was no bread, they would just buy it from someone else. That short-sightedness was half of why my people were starving. I refilled the pit with black living soil until the square was level again. Water came next. I cut 8 channels one way and 8 the other. A grid fed straight off the lake and set gates at every mouth so the flow could be opened or choked by hand. The height did the work. The water ran downhill on its own. Last, a wall around the whole field, because everything in this wilderness wanted to eat what I planted. Then I stacked hollow stone the length of the road and ran a covered tunnel from the new farm back to the first base, so no one crossing between them would ever be caught in the open. I set the last block into the fort wall and straightened up. 2 bases, joined. A place to grow food. Phew, I said to no one. Finally done. Marlin met me at the wall on my way in, and something was off. He greeted me warm as ever, then hesitated, the words backing up behind his teeth. I found out why in the hall. I had left 12 people here. I came back to about 50. Strangers, whole families of them, packed along the walls with their eyes down, gone dead quiet the moment I stepped through the door. While you were away, Marlin started. 4 families, like us, saw the tower and came looking for work. I let them into the fort without your permission. I'm sorry. Before I could answer, the woman beside him stepped forward, his wife, small and sharp-eyed behind her glasses. She said it was her doing, not his. She had looked at the newcomers, seen how hungry they were, and told Marlin to open the gate. If someone had to be scolded for it, she said, scold her. Then she braced, shoulders squared, chin up, waiting for the blow. So did the whole room. 50 people who had learned somewhere that a raised hand from a lord meant something landing. I raised my hand. I set it on top of her head and patted, twice, gentle. I won't scold, I told her. That's fine. She blinked up at me like the word made no sense. I turned to the rest of them, all those faces still waiting to be turned away. Every one of you is a citizen of this empire, I said. That used to make us comrades, and as far as I'm concerned, it still does. So forget the rest of it. Tonight, you eat. The silence held one more breath. Then it broke, and the hall filled with a sound I hadn't heard in Byram before, cheering. Dinner's ready, Sarah called from the back, already carrying it out. 53 people now. That number needed a town under it, so I built one. Inside the 100-step walls, I raised 10 houses around the mansion, then a public bath, a hall, and an office to run things from. It went up in a morning. The workbox does not tire. I couldn't be everywhere, so I stopped trying. I made Marlin base leader. The frontier post that met anyone arriving from other territories was his to hold now. This is a greater duty than I deserve, he said, and bowed his head. But I'll give it everything I have. I'm counting on you, I told him, and meant it. I pulled 10 of the stronger men into a hunting unit, so the whole burden of feeding us stopped falling on Sarah alone. The women who wanted household work took it. The 16 children I left out of all of it. Where I come from, a child's only job is playing, and I saw no reason to unlearn that here. Then I picked 3 families, 25 people, and sent them down the tunnel to live on the new farmland, with 10 houses of their own and 8 sacks of seed, potato and wheat, soybean and carrot, cabbage, cotton, pepper, apple, enough to put something other than meat on the table. The farmers stood at the edge of all that black soil like they weren't sure it was safe to step on, so I showed them. It's fine, I said. This ground sits at 80% fertility. It grows fast. Watch. I took a handful of wheat seed and cast it across the nearest row, the way you'd feed chickens, and pressed it under with my boot. Then I waited, and so did they. 25 people holding still around a strip of dirt. The soil moved. Green broke the surface. Not one shoot. A whole line of them at once, pushing up through the black in a soft crawling rush you could actually watch happen. Thread-thin blades unrolled and stiffened and climbed, a finger high, then a hand, the row thickening into a low green haze while the sun was still in the same place in the sky. Where I had thrown the seed, there was wheat, and it was still rising. Nobody said anything for a long moment. One of the women reached out and touched a blade like she needed her fingers to believe it. A man crouched right down at eye level with the row and just stared, watching it grow past his own hand. Somewhere behind me, somebody started laughing, the giddy kind, the kind that comes when a thing is too good to hold quietly. Then they were all crowded in at the edge of the row, pointing, calling the children over to see. 5% was good land in this world. I had given them 80, and it looked like a miracle, because to them, it was 1. I let them have it a while before I brought them back down. Don't plant the whole field yet, I told them. 1,000 steps of it is more than you can handle. Grow this out, save the seed, multiply it first, then we fill the rest. They nodded, but half of them were still watching the wheat climb. Back at the first base, I went to check the hunting squad, and Sarah was not going easy on them. Draw them in more, she snapped down the line. Don't fire in a panic. 10 men held their bows on the pit, waiting on her word. When she saw me, she lowered her own bow and grinned. Ah, Shade, welcome back. They're up to about level 6 now. Level 6 meant roughly 40 points of health each, enough that a single monster's swing wouldn't drop a man anymore. The whole reason for the pit had been to keep them alive while they were weak, and they weren't weak now, so I filled the pits in. Killing through my own traps only fed the experience back to me, the one who dug them. It was time they earned it with their own hands. I ran the workbox and pulled out 10 copper swords, still warm at the edges, and handed them down the line. You should learn close combat too, I said. Here, they came apart like children at a festival. One turned his over in the light. Another tested the weight with a slow swing. Every one of them thanked me at once, tripping over each other to do it. A blade of their own, for men who'd had nothing a month ago, it landed harder than the meal had. "I'll drill the footwork into them first," Sarah said, already stepping back onto the line. "Then I'll come find you. Go on ahead." I left the swords to her and went to see about the town. The office had a line already. 7 new refugees crowded the counter, loud and frayed. One of them shouting that if there was development here, then there had to be work. Another saying he hadn't eaten in 3 days. Marlon stood in front of all of it, unhurried, palms out. It's all right. Please wait your turn." The rule was the same one that had saved his own family. 3 days of food and a roof, no questions. After that, anyone who wanted to stay picked one of 3 trades: clerks, farmers, or hunters, and became a citizen of Byram. I left the sorting to Marlon. He was good at it, and he remembered being on the other side of that counter. A young woman was waiting for me by the inner door. Nora, Marlon's daughter, 19. Black hair cut in a straight fringe, a small dark mark like a tear under one eye. She served the household, and her face never moved. "Welcome back, Lord," she said, flat as still water. "There were no problems while you were gone, but there are guests. My father couldn't handle them, so they're waiting." 2 guests, she said, in 2 rooms. I told her to lead the way. The first room held a plump, cheerful man somewhere past 40, who rose the moment I entered and introduced himself as Tanner, a traveling merchant come to trade with my domain. "I am Shade, Lord of Byram," I told him, and sat. Then I gave him the truth, because there was no point hiding it. "We've only just started here. We have no money. I'm not sure we can trade the way you're hoping." He waved that off like a fly. He'd seen the tower from the highway, he said, a great pillar rising out of the forest, and figured any developing lord building something like that was worth the trip. As for the money, he laughed at me. Cash and credit were for small men. A lord's real wealth was the land itself, the right to it, and he was glad to start trading against that alone. Then he leaned in, all business. "As a token of friendship, is there anything you need?" There was. Salt first, cotton cloth, glass, alcohol, and tobacco. I listed them off, and he wrote them down, nodding at each one like I was handing him gifts instead of an order. We shook on it. His hand was soft, and his grip was quick. A man who closed deals for a living. "Stay the night if you can spare it," I told him. First honest partner Byram had ever had, and he'd come to us. The tower was earning its keep in ways I hadn't planned. The second room had a different kind of guest. He was thin, bearded, 30-ish, with a nervous set to him even as he looked down his nose. Dexter, a civil official out of Rodwell, the territory next to mine. He opened by letting me know he'd done his reading. He knew I'd once been a court magician in the capital. Then he set the knife down under the compliment. That was the past, he said, and the past was the past. What mattered now was that his territory and mine were of different rank, and I would do well to keep that in mind. His lord understood that Byram was a pitiful stretch of wasteland. Out of pure generosity, if I brought my domain into their faction, appropriate aid could be arranged. He said it all smiling in the softest, most courteous words he owned, and every one of them was a hand reaching for a leash. I already knew the answer. Nothing in this world is more expensive than free. Take his aid, and I'd wake up one morning as Rodwell's servant, which is exactly the collar I'd crossed a wasteland to get out of. The Empire had thrown me away once. I wasn't about to hand myself to the next man who thought he was above me, but I didn't want a war on my border either, so I kept my voice pleasant. "Your lord is generous," I said, "but we don't need aid. Friendly relations are more than enough. Tell him that once things here settle down, I'll send a letter myself." Something in his face pinched. A polite refusal is still a refusal, and he'd walked in certain I'd be grateful. He gathered himself, said the courteous things you say, and left. I watched the door shut behind him. Tanner had come to bet on what Byram would become. Dexter had come to own it and gone away stung. I filed the second man's face away where I keep things I'll need later, and I had a feeling I'd be seeing it again. I left Byram on foot with the golden pickaxe over my shoulder and not a single coin in my purse. That was the whole problem. A town of walls and farmland and 200 mouths costs money to grow, and I had land instead of money, so I went to turn one into the other the only way I knew: dig. The town didn't need me standing in it anymore. Marlon held the office. Sarah drilled the squad. That was the point of building the thing. It ran without me. Before I left, she caught my sleeve and told me to be careful and to stay off the east side of the lake because even she struggled with what lived there. I said I'd go north instead. North was supposed to be the safe direction. The tower had done its quiet work while I built. I'd left the town at level 13, and 3 days of mining put me at 17, my numbers climbing on their own every hour I stayed alive. It made me bold, maybe too bold. For 3 days, I dug my way north. Copper, iron ore, gold dust, a handful of magic stones. I pulled them out of the rock and dropped weak monsters as they came. undead that broke apart into light, orcs, horned rabbits. Each night I raised a hut straight out of the ground, slept, and moved on at dawn. Easy, right up until it wasn't. On the third day, the ground turned rich. Coal ran through the stone in black seams. The one thing I needed most, because coal smelts iron, and iron would open up everything I wanted to build next. I was grinning at a wall of it when the ridge stopped being generous. An orc mage came first, bigger than the field orcs, and throwing magic instead of fists. Its blast took 20 off my health before I closed the distance and put it down. I was still breathing hard when a lonely wolf broke from the rocks low and fast and opened my side with its fangs. 30 more, gone. I killed it too, but I felt that one. Half my health was spent, and the sun was going down. The smart move was to build a hut, sleep it back, and walk home in the morning with what I had. I actually turned to do it. Then I saw the hole. A wide, dark mouth between two leaning slabs of rock. A cave. Caves meant deeper minerals, better ore. Maybe the one thing that would pay for the whole town in a single trip. Turn back, I told myself. Just a little more, I told myself right back. I lit a small ball of light in my palm and walked in. The cave went down. I'd learned mapping in an earth magic class years ago and never once thought I'd use it underground. But it drew the tunnels for me as I walked and marked how far below the sea's face I was sinking. A little over 20 strides above it at the mouth. Then the numbers fell, past 200 below, past 250. The passages splitting into a maze that only ever pointed one direction, down. I mined the glowing rocks out of the walls as I went and let the pickaxe's own light lead me. It picks out ore on its own, so I let the light spell die. The deeper I dropped, the quieter it got, until the only sound left was my boots and my own breath coming back at me off wet stone. 300 strides below the sea. That was where the tunnel finally opened. The chamber was enormous, and it was full. I want you to see it the way it hit me. A mountain of raw wealth heaped from the floor up into the shadow. Coal and iron and gold and silver in the seams, and set all through it like eyes, gems, ruby, sapphire. The pickaxe threw its light across every face of it, and the whole room answered back in color. I laughed out loud in an empty cave 300 strides underground. I couldn't help it. Then I saw the stones that weren't gems. Small, dull things that glowed from somewhere inside themselves. I knew what they were the moment I closed my hand on one. Power stones. Swallow one and your attack climbs by 10 and stays there. For good, no matter your level. A single one is a fortune. I found 3, then a 4th, then a 5th, and my hands were shaking as I gathered them because I could feel what they meant. With these, I could stop being the man who only builds and start being the man nobody could touch. Get strong fast. That was the whole thought in my head. Get strong fast. When the wall behind me stood up, it wasn't a wall. It was a rock golem, gray and huge, and standing there the whole time. And it hit me across the back before I even began to turn. Something like a thunderclap went straight through me. My health didn't drop. It fell off a cliff. 10. I had 10 left, and the number just hung there in the air in front of my eyes. And I understood with my whole body that one more blow like that, and I was a dead man in a hole nobody would ever find. So I ran. There is no braver word for it. I bolted for the passage I'd come in by, and the way out filled up green. A dragon. Hard green hide. Red eyes lit with rage. A tail lashing behind it like a whip, and fast. So much faster than a thing that size had any right to be. It came at me with its fangs bared, and I did the only thing a man with 10 health and no sword arm can do against a dragon. I dove, head first, flat out, straight into the narrow crack of the entrance tunnel. Too small for the golem, too small for the dragon, just barely big enough for me. The dragon hit the gap behind me and stuck. I heard it screaming as I crawled. I climbed for a long time. Every branch of the maze I'd mapped on the way down, I took on the way up at a crawl, flinching at every shadow, spending nothing, because 10 health is not a number a man gambles with. When the tunnel finally went pale and I saw real sky at the top of it, I nearly wept. Sunlight, the outside. I'd left a mountain of treasure and 5 power stones behind me, and I did not care in the slightest. I was still breathing. The road home wasn't kind either. A couple of weak monsters found me on the trail, the sort I'd have flicked off my sleeve 3 days before, and I limped and bled and killed them, and lost health I couldn't spare doing it. By the time Byram's walls came up out of the dark, I was leaning on my copper sword the way an old man leans on a cane, and the number behind my eyes had fallen to 3. 3. One stubbed toe from dead. I said it to myself the whole last mile. Just a little more. A little more. Sarah was at the gate before I reached it. She took one look at me, and the color went out of her face. Shade! "What on earth happened to you?" She had my arm across her shoulders before I could get an answer out, and the moment her weight took mine, the last of whatever had kept me upright let go. I sagged. She caught the whole of it and held me standing. She called for Nora over her shoulder, a warm room, clean bandages, and the girl was gone and back with both before I'd finished insisting I could stand on my own. I couldn't, not really. Sarah set me down, traded her armor for the pink apron she wears around the house, and went to work on my arms and hands where the rock had opened them. "I can do this myself," I muttered. "It's embarrassing." She didn't even look up. "Hold still. These need cleaning first." When I tried to pull back, she just took my wrist again, gentle and completely immovable, and bound every last cut properly, one after another, until there wasn't a bare one left. Then she brought the porridge. She'd cooked it herself, something warm and soft for a man who'd nearly died on the road, and when I reached for the spoon, she slid it out of my reach and fed me instead, one slow mouthful at a time. A grown man, a lord of his own land, being spooned porridge by lamplight like a child. I grumbled through the whole bowl and ate every bit of it, and somewhere in the middle, the grumbling stopped meaning anything at all. She put me to bed after, and she stayed. The last thing I thought before I went under was that no one had looked after me like this since I was a boy. Then I was asleep. I woke restless. Damage from a monster isn't a normal wound. Sleep pays it back so long as you're above 0, most of it gone by morning, and overnight I'd climbed from 3 back up to 57 of my 160. Good enough to work, I decided, and swung my legs out of bed. Sarah put me straight back into it. "You mustn't go doing reckless things," she said, and her glasses caught the light in a way that ended the discussion before it started. I told her I wasn't doing anything reckless. She reminded me, without quite saying the words out loud, about the bet the two of us had made, and how a dead man in a hole wins nothing. "Keep it," she said. That was all. "All right," I said. "I know." So I stayed where she put me and let the town come to me instead. Ed came in first, one of the farmers I'd settled on the new fields, and he came in loud. He set a basket down at my bedside piled with potatoes and apples and stood over it like a man who'd just watched a miracle, because he had. "It's unbelievable," he said, turning one apple over in his hand. "You put a seed in that soil and it shoots up and it's bearing fruit before you've even straightened your back." The first harvest was in. The land I'd rebuilt was feeding us now, and feeding us fast. Marlin came after him with the ledger and the bigger number. Word had spread well past the frontier by now. A lord who was actually developing his land, who had walls and work and food to offer, and it was drawing people in off every ruined road in the region. The town had reached 200. 200. I'd walked into an empty stretch of poisoned dirt not so long ago with a pickaxe, and one woman who felt sorry for me. Now, 200 people were living inside walls I'd raised, and half of them had arrived while I was flat on my back in a bed, nearly bled out in a hole. The place didn't need me alive to grow. It was a strange thing to feel proud of. I felt it anyway. I gave Marlin the orders from the bed, 50 of the newcomers to the farms, 30 to the hunting squad, 20 to run the base itself. And then I told him the last thing, the one I'd already settled on staring up at the ceiling all morning. We were going to build a new base in the north, on that rocky ground, right where the cave had very nearly finished me. I meant to go back down to that chamber one day, and the next time I stood in it, I was not going to run. 200 people don't fit behind 100 paces of wall. I worked that out. The morning, I tried to cross from the bath to the gate and had to turn sideways twice to do it. So I built more wall. I set a second square down the north side of the first, the same 100 paces on a side, and called them Zone 1 and Zone 2, because I was tired and nobody was paying me to be clever. Then I filled the new one. Rows of houses, a reservoir to hold clean water, a public bath big enough for a crowd, and a small park with swings for the children, because a place with swings feels like somewhere people mean to stay. The citizens gathered at the edge to watch the walls come up out of nothing. I was used to that by now. What I wasn't used to was the story they'd started telling each other. Someone had decided I was a court magician from the capital, a great man who'd given up rank and comfort to come save the frontier out of the goodness of his heart, a saint. I heard it passed down the line like settled fact. I put my pickaxe down and told them the truth. I said I'd been demoted out here because a bureau cut my budget and needed a line to cross off. I said I was an outcast, same as them. They laughed. They thought I was being modest. One of them wiped his eyes and said it only proved how humble I really was. I gave up. Some stories you can't dig your way out of. I had 3 experience towers keeping the town leveled. I raised them to 30. The north was where the real ore was, and the north was full of things that could kill me. So if I was going up there, I wanted levels coming in faster than the monsters could take them out. 30 towers hummed the air like a struck wire. Sarah found me under them with her hands on her hips. "You built quite a lot," she said, looking up the row. "I need to be strong enough to work the rocky ground," I told her. "That means the north, alone." She didn't like alone. She said the north had nearly finished me once already, and that she should come. I told her no, not because I doubted her, because she was the only real guard the town had, and 200 defenseless people don't stay safe on their own. If she left with me, anyone with a grudge and a few swords could walk right in. She rested her forehead against my chest for a second, which from Sarah is most of a speech. I told her I'd take her somewhere once things settled. A day off. Just us. "Idiot," she said, but she stayed. I shouldered the pickaxe and walked north. The towers had done their work. I came back to the rock stronger than I'd left it, strong enough now to drop an orc mage in 2 swings where it used to take 3. I didn't go near the cave. The golem and the dragon were still down there in the dark, still out of my reach, and I'd learned my lesson about greed the hard way. I stayed on the surface and I mined. Coal and iron ore, load after load. Monsters cut down between hauls. When I had 1,000 ore and 200 coal, I stopped and built the 3rd base around them, an ironworks. I made clay from dirt, fired brick from clay, and stood a furnace and a smelter up out of the brick. I baked the coal down to coke and fed it and the ore into the fire together. 1,000 ore came out as 100 iron ingots, 1/10 of it, the rest slag, and from the first ingot I forged a sword. The copper one I'd been leaning on added 10 to a swing. This one added 50. I turned it in the light and thought, yes, made it. I walled the place against the night things, laid the bones of a worker town inside, and stood there doing the arithmetic. 3 days on foot back to the other bases. Too far to carry iron by hand. I'd need a road, maybe one day a rail on top of it. I didn't know it yet, but while I was up there pouring iron, the man in the next territory had decided I'd insulted him. Here's what I only heard about later. Weeks back, my steward had politely turned down an offer of protection from the Rodwell lord next door. To me, that was a closed matter. To him, it was an open wound. The way it was told to me, he took the refusal as a newcomer, treating him as an equal, and he wanted me put back under his boot. His advisor, a thin, clever man named Dexter, capital schooled and sour about it, had a plan for exactly that. Dress soldiers as bandits, send them to sack my little fort, then ride in with the real troops, drive the bandits off, and stand there as the hero who'd saved us, so that Byram would owe him. A debt is its own kind of leash. The Lord loved it. He told Dexter to lead it himself. 60 men came for us, 40 dressed as bandits, 20 held back to play rescuer. They slowed when they saw the walls. I'll give them that much sense. The last anyone in Rodwell had heard, Byram was a wasteland, and here it stood ringed in cut stone with those 30 towers humming over it. Even Dexter's nerve wavered. He talked himself back into it. He told his men the Byram Lord was a soft nobody under level 20, hardly worth counting. And if you say a thing in the capital's accent, apparently, it sounds true. He waved the 40 forward. They swaggered up to my gate playing their parts, hammering on the wood, shouting that they were bandits and we'd better open up before they broke it down. The gate opened. Marlin stood in the open gateway, calm as a man, greeting invited guests. "So you're bandits," he said. "Welcome to Byram. We've a room prepared. This way, please." That was not the fight they'd rehearsed. Confused, still in character, the 40 let themselves be walked to a side room laid out with long tables, platters of food, jugs of drink, and a quiet maid to pour for them. They looked at each other. Then they sat down and ate. It went about how you'd expect. 40 men who'd braced for a battle and got a banquet decided their luck had turned. The drink went around. The play acting got louder, then real. Full and cocky, they started thumping the tables and bawling for more. More food, more booze. And one of them looked around the warm little room and decided 40 armed men could help themselves to anything they liked in here. That was the moment the door opened. A woman walked in, silver hair tied high, glasses, light armor that didn't hide much of what it was built for. She looked the 40 of them over the way you'd look at a spill on the floor. "You bandits are weaker than I was told," she said. "I'd rather not kill anyone. So, 2 choices. Go home quietly or be arrested quietly." They laughed. 40 to 1. One of them lunged for her, all confidence, hands out. He never reached her. She wasn't where he grabbed. She was beside him, a smear of afterimage still hanging in the space she'd left, and a bright silver knife rested flat against his throat before his own weight had finished carrying him forward. He froze bent stupid over nothing, breathing very carefully. The room went dead still. "Disappointing," she said, and let it hang. The rest weren't laughing now. They went for their steel, 40 blades against one woman, and that was when Sarah tilted her head toward the far doors. They came apart. Byram's hunters, the squad she'd been drilling all this time, poured in from 3 sides, bows and blades already up, and closed the room before a single fake bandit could set his feet. No signal ever went out to the 20 men waiting in the trees to come be heroes. There was nothing left to rescue. All 40 were on the floor and roped before the drink had worn off. Not one of my people took a scratch. The scout got back to the Lord's camp long after it mattered, out of breath, carrying the worst news he'd ever had to carry. The whole disguised force, taken, all of it. The Lord didn't take it well. He didn't ask how or whether his men were even alive. He turned on the one who'd sold him the plan. In front of everyone, he stripped Dexter of his horse, told him a man who talked that big could walk home on his own 2 feet, and rode off with what was left of his soldiers. So Dexter walked, alone, through the trees, into the dark. The clever capital man with mud to the knee and no one left to impress. Somewhere on that road, the way it was told to me, something in him turned all the way over. He didn't blame the plan. He didn't blame the Lord. He blamed me. If fake bandits hadn't worked, he decided, he'd buy real ones. He had names in the underworld, men who killed for coin, and he'd pay them with power stones he already knew where to steal. I didn't know any of that yet. I was 3 days north, laying a road. I built the road high, not a tunnel, a causeway up on legs, open to the air, because the things that hunt the ground out here can't fly and can't climb, and because a raised bed is exactly what you want under a rail someday. 3 days on foot became a week of building. I laid it the whole way home. The town met me at the gate like I'd been off to war. They pointed at the bridge trailing away behind me and told each other over and over that the Lord had thrown up a whole road in a week. Unbelievable. Look at it. I let them. Marlin met me with the ledger. 350 people now. The tower still pulling them in off every road in the region. I told him to set 100 of them aside for new work. Then he mentioned, in the same flat tone, that 40 bandits had attacked the town while I was gone. I stopped. Bandits. They came, he said. It's handled. Sarah has one of them talking. Sarah was standing over a tied man when I came in, and she had the whole shape of it out of him already. They're not bandits, she told me. They're Rodwell soldiers. The neighbor dressed them up, had them attack us, and meant to ride in and play savior so we'd owe him. You should decide what happens to them. I looked at 40 men roped along the wall in their bandit costumes, and the whole stupid scheme laid itself out in front of me. Marlin's safe answer was to ship them to the capital and let central judgment deal with it. I told him to untie them. He didn't move. With respect, he said, that was too lenient. Let them off clean, and they'd only come back cockier and try it again. He wasn't wrong. I told him anyway. Rodwell wasn't some foreign enemy. They were people out of the same dead empire I came from, and somewhere under all the scheming, I had to believe the wish to make that empire stand on its own again was still asleep in them. If I answered a clumsy trick with mercy, maybe it never had to come to real killing between us. Marlin was quiet a long moment. I wondered if he'd finally decided his lord was a fool. Then he bent and started working a knot loose. I'll follow your feelings, he said. Sarah was already on the next rope. She'd known which way I'd go before I said a word. I still think it was the right call. I just didn't know yet that the one man it needed to reach wasn't in that room. He was 3 days gone, on foot, shopping for killers. The furnaces had been running for half a month, and by the time I came back up from the mining, the townspeople had turned my ore into a mountain of iron ingots. They looked almost embarrassed when I thanked them, like the work was nothing, like I'd handed them their lives instead of the other way around. I collected the whole stack into my inventory with the pickaxe and left them to it. Then I made myself armor. I could have made it heavy. I didn't. I made chainmail, guards for the feet, gauntlets, a plate for the forehead, and I kept every piece light on purpose. Where I was going, speed kept me alive. And the last time I'd been down there, speed was the only thing that had. I strapped it on, checked that I could still move fast, and told the townspeople I'd be gone a while. I had unfinished business at the bottom of that cave. The chamber was exactly as I'd left it. So was the thing waiting in it. The rock golem came at me the moment my light touched the walls, and my whole body remembered it. The last time, this floor had dropped me to almost nothing and sent me crawling home half dead. I swung the iron sword at it out of stubbornness. The blade rang off its hide and did exactly nothing, so I ran. The golem was strong, but it was slow, and slow I could work with. I stopped trying to fight it and started stealing from it instead. Down here, buried in the veins, were the power stones, and every single one, once I took it in, made me permanently stronger. So I mined, quietly. A stone here, a stone there, ducking back into the dark whenever that great stone fist came looking. It clipped me more than once. My health dropped, the armor swallowed most of it, and I kept my head down and kept digging. 6 stones, then 20, then more, trip after trip, until I'd pulled 89 of them out of that rock and taken every one. Each stone added 10 to what my strike could do. 89 of them nearly tripled it. The weakest mage in the Empire, the man whose attack score had once been a joke, now hit like something that had no business existing. I turned around and went looking for the golem. It found me first. That low, grinding rumble rolled out of it. The sound it made that was almost a laugh, like it thought this was the same as before, like it thought I'd come back to lose again. I let it think that. I let it draw back its fist and throw the punch that had nearly ended me. And this time, I slid under it, close, inside its reach, where a slow thing can't save itself. Then I hit it, once. The golem came apart, not chipped, not staggered. It broke all at once, the whole towering weight of it folding inward on itself with a groan like the mountain settling. And then it wasn't stone at all anymore. It dissolved. The whole mass of it thinned into a ball of pale light that hung there in the dark, turning, throwing soft glow across the walls where a monster had stood a heartbeat before. And then that light guttered out and there was nothing. No rubble, no sound. Just the space where the thing that had nearly killed me used to be. I stood in the empty dark with the sword still out, and I couldn't quite make my brain accept it. My hand wasn't even shaking. It had, the last time I stood in this room. Now it just hung there, holding a blade that had done the impossible without any effort at all. One hit. I'd carried the fear of that thing home in my bones and lost sleep over it, and in the end, it took me one hit. "This is insane," I said, to nobody, and I meant it. After that, the floor stopped being a nightmare and started being a job. My attack was overwhelming now, but my defense still wasn't. One good hit from the wrong thing could still finish me. So when my pickaxe caught a glitter deep in a crack in the rock and pulled out something silver and far stronger than steel, I knew exactly what to do with it. Mithril. I dug out every piece I could find, took it back up, and shaped it into armor instead of a blade. A protector. My defense went from thin to a wall. The wall got tested the next day. I was searching the fissures for more of the silver when the green dragon hit me from behind. The same monster whose roar had sent me running not long before. Its claws raked across my back, and I braced for the end. I took almost nothing, a scratch. The mithril simply refused it. I turned around and looked at the dragon, and I swear the dragon looked confused. Then I killed it, and my level jumped 10 in a single kill. So I killed the next one, and the one after that. 7 or 8 of them, one strike each, until the roar that used to freeze me was just another sound in the rock. With nothing left down there that could touch me, I stopped exploring and started building. I used the earth magic to strip the whole irregular cave into a clean cubic space, then cut a main tunnel 300 steps deep and branched it off block by block, labeling each one so I'd know what I'd taken and what I hadn't. It turned the deepest, deadliest room in the mountain into an orderly mine. I pulled coal and iron out of it, and gold and silver, rubies and sapphires. And, tucked in the leftover rock, another 22 power stones I'd missed, which I swallowed without breaking stride. By the time I checked, my level had crawled past 100 and all but stopped climbing. Nothing down here gave enough anymore. I'd outgrown the monsters that used to hunt me. The floor was silent now. No golems, no dragons, nothing but my own light and the sound of my own work. I'd wanted it empty. It just hadn't occurred to me how empty would feel. While I was gone, back at the first base, Sarah had been building something too. The town had swelled past 400 people, and the hunting team she ran had grown past 150. Men lining up for the work and the leveling, and, mostly, for the chance to earn one word of praise from the terrifying woman drilling them. She worked them hard. They loved her for it. Some of them were already climbing levels they'd never have touched on their own. She wasn't standing still either. Teaching, of all things, had pushed her own level up several notches, past where she'd been stuck for years. She drew that golden bow of hers and put arrow after arrow dead center, and not one of them missed. The way it got back to me later, she stopped between drills that evening and looked out at the wasteland toward the north, where I was, and asked the empty air when I was coming back. I didn't hear it then. I wish I had. Here's what was happening out in the world while I dug, the way Tanner told it to me afterward. He'd been riding toward the capital to trade, sharing a carriage with another merchant, and he'd spent half the road bragging about Byram, a fortress, and a whole town risen out of frontier that used to be nothing but rock. The other man didn't believe a word of it. Tanner just kept grinning and swearing he'd seen it with his own eyes. Then the carriage stopped, and stayed stopped. The road ahead was a wall of stalled traffic, and when the driver came back from checking, he told them the bridge into the capital had collapsed. Someone asked, reasonably, why they didn't just wait for it to be repaired, and the driver explained, flat and tired, that there wasn't going to be a repair. There was no one left to do it. The Earth Department, the office that had kept the roads and the bridges and the tunnels of the whole empire standing, had been shut down. Cut. Struck off the ledger as a waste of budget. And here was the part Tanner couldn't stop coming back to. The people in that carriage had approved of the cut. They'd nodded along when the assembly called it savings, felt clever about it, and now they sat in the same carriage, staring at the broken bridge, and could not say a single word, because to complain was to admit what they'd voted for. They knew. Every one of them in that carriage knew, and none of them would say it. Each of them was doing the same quiet arithmetic behind their eyes, remembering their own hand going up in the assembly, their own voice in the crowd that called the Earth office a waste, and matching it now against the ruin in front of them, and the week of their lives it was going to cost. Not one of them could look at another. To meet a neighbor's eye was to see the same guilt looking back. They'd cheered the removal of the one thing holding the road up, and now the road was down, and the silence in that carriage was the sound of every one of them arriving at that truth at the same moment and having absolutely nowhere to put it. A trip that should have taken half a day took them a full week. Tanner brought the whole story to Byram weeks later, still shaking his head about the week he'd lost. A half-day road, he said, spreading his hands like he still couldn't fit it in his head. Gone, and not a soul in the capital who can put the bridge back. I let him talk. I already knew why. I'd been the one who kept that road up. 9 years of it. Every bridge, every tunnel, every stretch of stone that carried people who never once thought about who held it together. They'd called that work a waste to my face and sent me out here to be forgotten. And now the thing they threw away was gone, and the empire was quietly starting to fall through the gap where it used to be. I didn't smile. There wasn't anything to smile about. Somewhere out there, real people were stranded on a broken road. Families stuck for a week on a trip that used to take an afternoon, and I knew that, and I felt it. I just couldn't make myself pretend I was sorry. The bridge was only the first one. There were 1,000 more roads out there I'd held together, all of them counting down now, and no one in that capital had the first idea how to stop it. They'd said I was worthless. The capital was about to spend the next long while learning exactly what I'd been worth. It wasn't over. It had only just started to show. I'd stopped counting the iron and the coal weeks ago. The thought stones were the ones that kept surprising me. They came up out of the grid a handful at a time, dull gray cores the size of knuckles, and by the time I'd worked through the labeled blocks, I had 232 of them sitting in the box with nothing to do. Power stones still turned up too, only a couple at a time now, but the thought stones came in floods. It made sense once I thought about it. Golems were what haunted this cave, and a golem's heart was a thought stone. Mine the place golems came from, and of course you drowned in the things they were made of. So I decided to make one. I fed all 232 into the workbox and told it to press them clean. Impurities were what turned a golem hostile, so I squeezed them as close to pure as the box could go. The count dropped as they tightened. 200 became 100, 100 became 81, each stone smaller and harder and brighter than the last. 81 pure cores. Enough, the box told me, for a figure about half the height of a man. Then I had to picture it. That was the problem. I was a valedictorian at magic. I was hopeless at art. I tried to hold the shape of a person in my head, shoulders, a face, 2 good hands. And what the box handed back was a barrel with legs, stubby arms, 2 dots for eyes, a lump where a nose should sit. I looked at it a while. Well, I said, with my drawing sense, that's probably the ceiling. It tilted its head and made a low sound, like a rock clearing its throat. It moved, not fast. The whole barrel of it shuddered, gravel grinding on gravel, and then it planted one stubby leg and then the other, and stood there in front of me, swaying a little, looking up. I braced without meaning to. The last golem in this cave had nearly killed me, but this one only watched, head cocked, those 2 dot eyes fixed on my face, with nothing in them but a kind of patient question. Pure to the last decimal. There was no malice left in it to turn. I'm your master, I told it. Understand? It didn't argue. It leaned an inch closer instead, waiting, as if the word had gone in and it was holding still to see what came next. The thing needed a name. I tried a couple on it. Go? A flat little grunt, almost sullen. Remy? Worse? It turned its face half away, sulking, and I actually laughed. This lump of pressed stone had opinions. I looked at what it was. Small, round, gray, a pebble that had decided to stand up. Pebble, I said. The change went through it like a struck bell. It bounced, both feet, clear off the ground, gravel rattling down its sides, came down and bounced again. That low rumble climbing into something almost like a chirp. It jumped for its own name. I was standing 300 steps under dead earth, months since I'd heard another voice down there, watching a barrel of rock leap for joy because I'd called it Pebble, and something in my chest that had gone stiff and quiet a long time ago cracked a little open. I reached out and patted the top of its head. It went still under my hand, humming. All right, I said. Pebble it is. I handed it an iron pickaxe and showed it how. Look, you swing it at the rock, like this. I took a wall down to show the motion. Pebble copied me, badly. The first swing missed the stone entirely and nearly took its own leg off. The second clipped the wall and jarred the pick clean out of its hands. Good, I told it anyway. Just get used to it. It got used to it fast. I put it on one block and took the next myself, and every time I glanced over, it was smoother. The swing shorter, the aim truer, the pile of ore behind it taller. It started at maybe a tenth of my pace. By the end of the day, it wasn't slow anymore. Whatever a golem was, it learned the way water finds a crack, quietly, and then all at once. I gave it its own blocks. It finished them and came back looking for more, and it started bringing me things, sorting what it dug, carrying the good ore over in both arms to hold up for me to see. One afternoon, it came trotting back with half a dozen pieces of pale blue-gray stone cradled against its chest and set them down at my feet like an offering. Mithril. It had found mithril. I turned a piece over. I'd wanted a mithril sword for weeks now. My iron blades shattered under my own arm, and a proper one would end that. 3 pieces of this would make it. I looked at the sword I didn't have. Then I looked at Pebble, standing there with its iron pick, waiting to be told it had done well. I made it a pickaxe instead. 3 pieces of the mithril, worked in the box into a bright pale head on a short haft, sized for stubby arms. I held it out. Pebble took it, turned it over, understood what it was, and swung it hard, at nothing at all, purely for the joy of swinging it. The sword could wait. I'd never once regretted a thing I built for someone glad to have it. Marlin came up from the surface a few evenings later, road dust still on his coat. He'd been out to Rodwell. I'd sent him to hand their fake bandit back and tell their lord, plainly, that Byram would not be carrying the matter to the capital. The lord had been astonished, he said. A man in that position had braced for me to bury him in complaints to the central authorities, and when I didn't, he'd fallen over himself praising my character, a noble soul, a rare man of integrity. All of it pitched a little too loud to be sincere. Marlin told it flat, the way he tells me things he doesn't quite believe. Then he got to the part that mattered. The whole thing, the costumed soldiers, the false raid on my gate, had been one man's design, a civil official of Rodwell's. The lord gave up the name easily now that it cost him nothing to give. Dexter, the same petty clerk who'd first come to my door with his nose in the air, been refused, and gone home stung. And here's the thing, my lord, Marlin said, setting his hat down on the counter. He's gone, slipped out of Rodwell. Nobody there knows where. The lord had wrapped it in a warning. Don't lower your guard. No telling what a man like that might do out in the wilds. Handing off the danger like a coat he didn't care to hold. I thought about the clerk with the superior little smile. Beaten once, humiliated once, and now loose somewhere past the edge of the map with a grudge and no master left to answer to. Good work, I said. Get some rest. I didn't say the rest of it out loud. A named enemy you can see is a problem you can measure. A named enemy who's vanished is a question, and questions were the one thing I'd never learned to leave alone. The mining ran itself now, Pebble and the grid between them, and the ironworks kept pace. The stockpile creeping up toward the count I'd need before I could lay real rail between the first base and the third. While I waited on the iron, I built a train, a small one, a tenth the size of the true thing, a locomotive no taller than my knee, running a loop of track I'd laid across the garden. The steam engine had beaten me for a while. I could burn coal to boil water easily enough, but I could not for the life of me picture the gears that would carry that force down from the boiler into the wheels. And the workbox only makes what you can clearly see. So I stopped picturing gears. I fed it magic stones instead and let the raw energy turn the wheels directly, crystals handling the conversion. That math I could do in my sleep. It was running its loop when 4 of the base's girls came round the corner and stopped dead. Wah! "What is that?" one of them said, and then they were all down at the edge of the track, crouched, faces lit, like I'd laid a piece of the moon in the grass. "It's a railway," I said, "a prototype." That undid them completely. There was exactly one other railway in the whole empire, and it lived in stories, and here was one running circles in their own back garden. Pebble climbed aboard and rode past them, sitting up proud on the little flatbed, and that finished it. They wanted on too. "At that size, it's a bit much for people," I said. 4 faces fell at once. I couldn't help it. When the real ones finished, I told them, "You can ride it all you want. Just be patient till then." Then I hit the wall I should have seen coming. A railway needs wood, sleepers under every length of rail, cars to run on top of it, and I was nowhere near enough. So I made a forest. It took a day. I edited a strip of dead ground beside the base up to rich fertility, pulled the sparse wild trees scattered across the wasteland, and replanted them close together in the black new soil. Then I filled a small pond from the lake water I keep stored and gathered the base's women. "Water them from the pond," I told them. "And, soil this rich grows weeds about as fast as it grows trees, so there'll be weeding too. If it gets to be too much, pull some of the men off the ironworks." They took it on gladly. Everything out here was still new enough to feel like a gift. I stood a while looking at the saplings. Thin things now, but they wouldn't stay thin in that soil. Once they'd grown, I'd have my wood. And once I had my wood, I'd lay the rail along the raised road between the bases and close the 3 days that stood between my people and each other. It had been a good stretch of days. A golem that jumped at its own name, a train running circles in the garden, a forest planted for a railroad, and somewhere out past all of it, past the edge of any map I owned, a beaten little man with a grudge was walking, and not one soul alive knew toward what. I went back down into the mine and kept building. Whatever was coming, I'd rather meet it holding more than it expected. I was 300 steps under the earth, teaching a golem to hold a sword, the night a small man with a grudge walked into a den of killers and bought my town out from under me. I didn't hear a word of it until it was nearly too late. This is how it happened. Far off in a back room of the imperial capital, the thin bearded official I'd once turned away from my gate spilled a handful of stones onto a filthy table. They caught the lamplight and threw it back, deep and blue. Power stones, rare glowing ore that could nearly triple the strength of the man who carried them. He'd stolen them, and now he was spending every last one. The men around the table were the Crimson Bandits, killers wanted in more countries than any of them could name. They laughed at him at first. They'd never heard of the Byram region, and they didn't believe a scrawny clerk who swore a fortune had grown out of empty wasteland. The room turned mean. For a moment, I think he expected to die there. Then their boss stepped out of the dark at the back. He was enormous, steel across the shoulders, a face like something dragged up out of a swamp, more scars on him than skin. His men went quiet the way men go quiet around a thing that might kill them for sport. He'd been listening the whole time, and one detail had hooked him, the rumor of a terrifyingly strong woman out on that frontier, a fighter worth crushing. That, he said, sounded like an interesting job. He wanted the stones up front, all of them, and he made one thing plain. His people were not actors. They would not lose on purpose, they would not go easy, and whatever they broke for real. The official agreed to all of it. In his own head, he'd already gone further than that. Let the brute have the woman as a trophy once the fort was taken. He was never going back to his old post anyway. He had nothing left to protect and one man left to ruin, and he told himself both of those were the same thing. Meanwhile, at my first stronghold, the town had grown into something worth the greed of men like that. 500 people lived inside the walls now. 200 of them could hunt, and Sarah ran them, the woman who'd walked away from an S-rank post and a guild seat to bet her life on my gamble. She stood in the yard at the end of a drill, watching the ranks break, and reminded herself not to get comfortable. You never knew, she thought, what kind of strong enemy might come walking out of the wasteland. In the corner, 7 of the youngest recruits were still going. They were the greenest fighters in the settlement. Young men, not long past boyhood, kept off the real hunts until they were ready. So she went over and asked them what they thought they were doing. They snapped upright and told her, all in a rush, that they'd begged for placement. They didn't want to be left behind. They wanted to be strong. "We want to be strong like you, Lady Sarah," the tallest one blurted, and the words tumbled out of the rest of them behind it. "And protect this land. Please train us." She looked at them for a long moment. Then something in her settled. "Fine," she said, "but I train hard, and I don't go soft because you're small. You'll hate me by sundown." They saluted her like she'd handed them the world, and she made a quiet promise to herself, watching their lean arms shake through the next set, that for these young ones, she would keep this town standing no matter what came. She didn't know yet that something was already coming, something stronger than her. 300 steps under all of that, I was mining, and I knew none of it. The smelting racks were still working through their ore, and the young trees weren't tall enough to cut. So Pebble and I did the thing we were best at. We went deeper, down where the rare ore ran thick. I struck a seam of stones I'd never seen, 13 of them, dull and gray until the workbox read them out for me. Stardust, it called them. Each one raised speed, not just in a fight, in work, in everything. Every swing of a pickaxe, every step quicker. I fed all 13 into myself and stood there feeling it settle in. Then I swung at the wall to test it, and the pick came down and back and down again before my old body should have finished the first stroke. I laughed out loud in the empty dark. I'd gone digging for iron and come up faster than I'd ever been in my life. I didn't think much more of it than that. A convenience? A little extra speed for a man laying track. I had no idea I'd just picked up the one thing that would decide whether the woman above me lived or died. Then something roared down the tunnel, and a green dragon came around the bend with its mouth already open. Any other man would have run. For me, it was just tedious. At level 105, I'd stopped gaining anything from things this size. Killing it myself would have been a chore that taught me nothing, but it could teach my golem plenty. I crouched by Pebble. "Want a turn?" I said, and it tilted its round head at me, eyes bright. I poured power stones into its little frame, more than 40 of them, and watched its numbers climb until its strength was a thing that could hurt a dragon. Then I put a blade in its stubby hands, a mithril sword, freshly forged from the last of what we'd found. Pale silver, keen. My own iron swords still shattered under my grip, so I had no proper blade of my own. This one I gave away without a second thought. The plan was simple and a little shameful. I stepped out and shouted at the dragon and let it clip me, and I sold it hard. Staggered, clutched my side, groaned like it had really landed. Pebble went off like a struck match. It thought its master was being hurt. That was all it needed. The little golem came across the stone in a gray blur, mithril flashing, and put everything I'd loaded into it behind one swing. The dragon didn't survive it. It came apart mid-roar and went down in a slide of dust, and the cavern went quiet. Pebble stood over it, chest heaving in that wordless way it had, then spun and bounced to me, chirping, checking me over for the wound I'd faked. Its level had leapt from 1 clear up to 12 in a single blow. I crouched and patted its head. "You did that for me," I said. "Thank you." It hummed so hard I felt it in my knees. Word came up from the base that same morning that everything I'd been waiting on had finally arrived. The iron stockpile had crossed 100,000. The trees I'd planted had grown tall enough to cut, which meant I could finally start the thing I'd been circling for weeks, the full railway, real rail on the raised road between the first base and the third. The line that would fold a 3-day journey down to almost nothing. I set the pickaxe against my shoulder and looked down the empty roadbed with Pebble at my heel, already seeing the track run all the way to the horizon. I was happy. I was faster than I'd ever been. My golem could fell a dragon, and I was about to connect my whole frontier with a single iron line. I did not know that at the far end of it, my town had maybe an hour left before the killing started. The Crimson Bandits came out of the tree line and stopped dead when they saw the walls. They doubted the scrawny official the whole road. Now they stood there taking in cut stone and raised rooftops in the middle of nowhere, and the doubt curdled into hunger. "This place was ripe," one of them said. "Look at the value just sitting here." Their boss combed a hand back through the ridge of hair down the center of his skull and grinned like a pig at a trough. He announced to no one and everyone that he'd take the fortress and then the land, and then the whole territory with it. From today, it all belonged to him. The official made the mistake of speaking then. A little told you so. A reminder that everything he'd promised was true. One of the brutes knocked him flat into the dirt for it, and he stayed down there, groaning, swallowing every word he wanted to say. Thugs, he thought, nursing his ribs. He was the one using them. He kept telling himself that. Then the whole line of them started walking toward my open gate. Here is the part that still turns my stomach to tell. The town had grown to nearly 1,000 mouths, and all those mouths had eaten through the stores faster than anyone planned. So that very morning, to feed everyone, every adult hunter in the stronghold had marched out together on one enormous hunt. Every sword, every bow, Sarah's whole corps gone past the forest. They left the recruits, the youngest fighters, too green to take on a real hunt. And when the drill ended, most of them slouched off to rest and grumble about never being allowed to do anything real. One stayed, Remy, the shortest of the 7, the one the others teased for going red whenever Sarah's name came up. He kept swinging his practice sword alone in the empty yard, because the night before, he'd dreamed a dream he couldn't shake, a dream where danger came for Sarah, and he'd stepped in front of her and shielded her with his own body. He'd woken up with his heart pounding and made himself a promise. He would get strong enough to truly protect her one day. Nothing more than that, just that, with his whole small heart. That was when the clerk came sprinting across the yard, white-faced, screaming that bandits were at the settlement, that they were already inside the outer streets, and there was no one at all, to stop them. The other recruits froze. Remy didn't. "Then I'll fight," he said, and he was already running for the west gate before anyone could grab his arm. He came around the corner, and there were dozens of them, tearing through the street, and one lone recruit with a wooden-handled sword standing in front of the lot. They laughed at him. That was their mistake. Remy was small, and he was fast, and he was furious. And before the laughing stopped, he ducked under a swing and cracked one man's arm clean across, then dropped a second with a blow to the jaw. "I won't forgive you," he shouted, voice shaking, "if you hurt one more person in this town." Then the numbers caught up with him. A blow took his legs, another put him in the dirt, and a heavy hand closed around him and hauled him up off the ground, and the whole street tilted around him. For one cold second, he thought this was where it ended. He thought, "I'm going to die here," and I never even got to stand in front of her the way I did in the dream. He shut his eyes. An arrow answered him. It came out of nowhere and struck the arm of the man moving in to finish him, and the grip broke, and Remy hit the ground gasping. Sarah was there. She stood at the mouth of the street in white protective armor, her golden bow already drawn again, glasses catching the light, cool as still water. "You gutless pack of dogs," she said quietly. "All of you, on one green recruit." She sighted down the next arrow. "You're finished." And the boss of the Crimson Bandits only smiled. He'd been waiting for her. He told her so. That word of a ridiculously strong woman out here had reached him long before he ever set foot near her walls, and that he'd come prepared for exactly this. Then he reached up and tore his coat off his shoulders. Underneath, he wasn't a man anymore. He was something the stolen stones had built, muscle heaped on muscle, swollen far past anything a body should carry. The 10 power stones he'd bought with my enemy's theft burning under his skin. He rolled his monstrous shoulders and told her he'd been looking forward to breaking her most of all. Sarah's arrow stayed level, but for the first time since she'd walked away from her old life, I think a cold thread of doubt went through her, because the thing in front of her was faster and stronger than anything her speed and her bow had ever put down. And I was a whole railway away, laughing in the dust with a golem at my heel, faster than I'd ever been in my life, holding the one thing that could have saved her and not knowing she needed it. A bandit had Remy by the collar, hauling him up off the dirt like a sack, and then all at once the bandit didn't have anything in his hand at all. I wasn't there for this part. I need to say that plainly, because everything I know about the next few minutes I put together afterward, from what she told me and from what the street still showed me when I finally reached it. So I'm going to tell it the way it happened. Even the piece of it I would give a great deal never to have had to picture. She came across the open ground faster than the men could turn their heads. One moment, she was a white shape at the mouth of the street. The next, she was between the boy and the blade, and Remy was down safe against a wall where the smoke ran thinnest. She crouched to his level for exactly one breath. "It's okay," she told him. "You did well." He was crying, trying to get an apology out, ashamed he hadn't held them. She didn't let him finish it. She put a hand flat on the top of his head, the way you'd steady something you meant to keep. And then she stood, and the softness went out of her like a light switched off. The bandits had realized the boy was gone from between them. They started in on her, jeering, telling her what they thought a woman with a sword was going to do about a street full of them. She let them talk. She drew the blade she carried and turned it in her hand so the flat of it faced out. "Put them down," she said. "All of you, now." Then she was among them. I've seen her move before. I still don't have good words for it. She went through the front of that pack like wind through a curtain, the back of the blade across a knee, across a wrist, across a jaw, and every man she touched folded and stayed folded. Bones broke. Nobody died. That was a choice she was making even then, in the middle of a burning town, with her home coming apart around her. Hurt them enough to end it. Not 1 inch past that. Half a dozen of them were on the ground inside 10 heartbeats. The rest stopped laughing. For a moment, she told me this later, and her voice went strange when she did. For a moment, she thought it was already over. She thought she had won. That was when the big one at the back of the street finally moved. A hand closed on her wrist, one hand, and she stopped like she'd run into a wall. Butch had crossed the distance without her seeing it, a mountain of a man, all scarred slab and that stiff ridge of hair down a shaved skull. and he had her sword arm caught in his fist. And for the first time in years, her speed did her no good at all, because speed needs room, and he had taken the room away. He was pleased with himself about it. I'll spare you his exact words. The man liked the sound of his own voice, and none of it deserves repeating. The shape of it was simple. He told her that once he had hold of a thing, being fast didn't matter, and that he had hold of her. She didn't panic. She twisted against the grip and put her own strength into it. Real strength. The strength that had made her name long before I ever met her. And she told him flatly that she was a great deal more than fast, and that he should let go while he still could. He only smiled and closed his other hand over her free arm, and the muscle heaped up along his shoulders, and she didn't move him, not an inch. She asked him how. She heard herself ask it. He was happy to answer. He was proud of the answer. He'd come into a treasure, he said. Power stones, each one worth 10, and he'd taken 10 of them into himself. A full 100 stacked onto a frame that had been monstrous to begin with. A man named Dexter had handed them to him like party favors. The color went out of her face. She said the number back to him. 10? As if saying it might make it smaller. It didn't. He hauled both her arms in tight and told her how the rest of it would go. And I won't give him that either, except to say the promise was that she belonged to him now, and the town with her, and that there was nothing left she could do about any of it. Behind him, his men found their voices again and started to cheer. And here is the one thing I let myself see from the inside, because she gave it to me herself later in the dark when I asked her what she had been thinking. She said she stopped fighting the grip for half a second. She said she had never in her life called for anyone. She was the one people called for. But the wall in front of her did not care how strong she was, and her home was burning behind her. And so she shut her eyes and she called without a sound, with everything she had. Shade, please, come. I didn't hear it. That's the part I can't fix, no matter how many times I go back over it. I didn't hear a thing, because I was laughing. At the exact moment that hand closed on her wrist, I was standing on the elevated road a whole railway away, fitting the last stretch of track toward the first stronghold, and having, honestly, one of the better mornings of my life. I hadn't meant for it to go so fast. Half the third base had wanted to come. There'd been more volunteers than there was work, and they'd drawn lots for the honor of it. And now a crowd of them were strung out along the elevated road behind me, passing sleepers hand to hand, tightening bolts, asking me every few steps whether they could set the next rail themselves. I kept saying yes. It's hard to say no to people that glad to be useful. Pebble worked at my heel, seating the iron in that patient, tireless way of his, and the track crept forward toward the far stronghold 10 steps at a time. The girls who'd ridden along were already talking about who they'd see when we arrived, who they'd missed, what they'd say. Then the last rail dropped into place, and the two ends of the line met, and the whole thing was one road of iron from my base to hers. They cheered. Somebody shouted that we were back, that we'd made it, that they were home. The girls were laughing. I stood there in the wind with the sun on me and a golem at my knee and let myself feel about as good as I'd let myself feel in 9 years. I remember thinking the town was going to be so pleased. I remember planning how I'd introduce Pebble to everyone and how I'd tell Sarah, she worried, she always worried, that she could stop now, that the roads were joined and nothing out here was more than an hour from help ever again. The stardust I'd swallowed in the dark had made me quicker than anything on that frontier, and I did not know that quickness was the only thing left that could still reach her in time. I picked up my tools and I walked toward the gate, whistling. The wrongness reached me before anything else did. I came in through the stone gate expecting the usual. People, noise, someone running out to meet the train. Instead, the main street was empty. Doors stood open on nothing. A cook fire had been left to burn down to coals with no one tending it. There was a smell under the ordinary town smells that I knew from the deep places underground. The smell of things broken open. And there was smoke, and there was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the other kind. The kind a place goes when everyone in it is holding their breath at once. Pebble stopped beside me. He'd gone still in a way he only went when something was a threat. Low and dense and waiting, the mithril blade already in his stubby hands. I put a hand out to steady him without really deciding to. "Where is everyone?" I said, not loud. It didn't feel like a place you could be loud in. Then I heard it, off past the bend of the street toward the west gate. Men, a lot of men, jeering, laughing, the specific ugly sound of a crowd enjoying something it shouldn't. It rolled down the empty street toward me, and my whole body understood it before my head caught up. I started walking toward the sound, Then I wasn't walking anymore. I came around the bend and I saw her, Sarah, in the white armor, the armor she'd worn the day she walked into that court and put a room full of men in their place for me, held up off her feet in the fists of a thing shaped like a man, her arms pinned, her head turned away from a face leering down into hers. A ring of them packed the square, cheering him on. She wasn't struggling anymore. That was what did it. Sarah, who never in her life stopped moving, hanging still in a stranger's hands. Something in me that had been quiet and reasonable and patient for a very long time simply went out. I don't remember crossing the square. There's a gap there. One moment I was at the mouth of the street with the whole distance still in front of me, and the 13 stardust stones I'd swallowed in the dark of the mine chose that moment to be worth everything they'd ever cost. Because the next thing I knew, the ground had blurred out from under me, and I was already there, already inside his reach, and my hand was already closed around the thick of his neck. He had time to notice me, just barely. A confused animal sound, a question, "What are you?" "Get your hands off her." I don't think I've ever said anything and meant it so completely. Every stone I'd taken into myself down there, all 111 of them, everything I'd become in the dark while they thought I was finished, I put the whole of it into one motion. I tore him off her and I threw him. I want to be honest about how it looked because it's the only time in my life I've done anything like it. He didn't stagger. He didn't fly a little way and roll. He left the ground like a stone out of a sling and went out over the heads of his own men and over the wall behind them and kept going. And the sound he made hitting the far end of the world was not a sound I need to describe. The whole square rocked with the wind of it. Fires guttered. Men were knocked flat where they stood. The cheering stopped as if a hand had come down over every mouth at once. For one held breath, nobody in that square moved. 100 faces that had been laughing a moment before were turned toward me now, and I watched the same thought arrive behind every pair of eyes at the same time, that whatever their boss had been, and he had been the biggest, meanest thing any of them had ever followed. He had just gone over that wall like a thrown rock, and the thin, tired man standing in the smoke had done it with one hand and hadn't even watched him land. Pebble came up hard at my side then, low and bristling, the mithril blade out, and put himself between the two of us and the rest of them, and that was the last push. They broke, all of them, at once, in every direction that wasn't toward me. And Sarah, suddenly with nothing holding her up, dropped and stumbled back off her heels into the blast of it. Her glasses came off her face and struck the stones, and the lens broke clean across. I caught her before she fell. I had her against my chest, both arms around her, and she was shaking. And I was running my hands over her looking for the wound I was so sure had to be there. There wasn't one. She was whole. She was just shaking, the way you shake when the thing you'd already given up on turns out to have come after all. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The square had emptied out around us. Whatever was left of his men had decided all at once that they wanted to be somewhere else, and Pebble had gone after the stragglers, and it was just the two of us standing in the smoke with the sun starting to cut through it. She had her hands fisted in the front of my armor, like she meant to make sure I stayed real. Without the glasses, her eyes were bare, blue, brimming. She looked up at me, and something that had been walled up behind all that competence for as long as I'd known her simply came down. "I love you," she said. I felt the words go through me before I understood them. "I love you," she said again. Faster now, the tears coming with it, gripping tighter as if I might argue. I thought I'd never. Shade, marry me. I mean it. Marry me." I held her a little tighter, and I didn't answer right away, because there were a dozen things moving through me at once, and I couldn't get them into any order. Relief, so hard it hurt. The picture of her hanging still in those fists, which I knew even then I was going to carry for the rest of my life. And under all of it, quiet and stubborn and unwelcome, the old caution, the voice that had learned over 9 long years never to reach for a good thing without first checking who was going to take it away. I've replayed that moment 100 times since, and I still don't fully forgive the answer I gave. Not because it wasn't true, because she deserved a plain yes, with nothing hung off the end of it, and I couldn't quite make myself hand it over. 9 years of being told what I was worth do something to a man. Some part of me still needed a reason before it would let itself want a thing that good. So I told her the truth I could manage instead. I brushed the wet hair off her face, and I held her eyes with mine, and I said it quietly. "When I make this territory the strongest," I said, when it's the strongest in the whole empire, and it will be. Then, yes, it wasn't the yes she'd asked for. She heard the condition in it as plainly as I did, but she also heard the yes, and she chose, for that moment, to take it. She laughed once, wet and disbelieving, and she pulled me down the rest of the way, and she kissed me, there in the middle of her half-burned town, in the smoke, with her broken glasses on the stones at our feet, and the whole joined length of the railway waiting behind us. I stopped keeping track of reasons for a while. The town was still standing. She was still standing. And somewhere past the wall, the man who'd thought he could take both of them was learning otherwise. We weren't finished. There was a debt still open behind all of this, older than any bandit, and it was coming due. But that was tomorrow. This was today, and I let it be today, and I held on. The last of the bandits went down under Pebble before I crossed the square. It could have been worse for them. I caught Pebble's arm as it wound up over the final man, and it looked back at me with those two flat stone eyes, and I shook my head. Pebble, don't kill them. It held there a moment, unhappy about it in the small wordless way it has, a low grumble rolling out of its chest like a cart over gravel. Then it lowered the man to the dirt instead of through it and stepped back and let the thing be done my way. We hauled their boss out from beyond the wall where I had put him. He was still breathing, which surprised me a little. We wrapped him in iron chain, more of it than one man needs, and sat him against the stone. He did not laugh now. He watched me the way a big dog watches a door. Marlin came through the settling ash with a folded paper in his hand and no color in his face. He had written a message in from the neighboring territory, from the Lord at Rodwell, and the news in it was worse than a raid. Their treasury was empty. Their own civil official, Dexter, had cleaned it out and vanished in the same week he had hired these men to burn my town. And among what he took, Marlin told me, were 10 power stones. 10. I kept my face still. 10 was not the end of the world. It was, though, a serious crime, and it was the thread that tied the man who ran and the man in my chains into one knot. So I crouched in front of the boss and told him the shape of it plainly. I was not going to free him, but there is a long distance between a cell and a grave, and where he landed on that road depended on one thing, which was Dexter. And where Dexter had gone, he started to bargain, something about bandit honor, about how a man who sells his employer never works again. I let him hear how little that weighed with me, and for the first time since I had thrown him, I watched the fear come up under all that scarred bulk, and I knew he was about to give me the name of the place. That was when the clapping started behind me, dry, slow, a few flat strikes of two gloved hands. I turned, and there was Director Miles at the mouth of my own gate, an escort of Imperial soldiers filing in at his back, spears bright, and that same thin smile I had carried out of the capital 9 years' worth of memory ago. He had come, he said, on a tip. Word had reached him that the famous Crimson Bandits had turned up in the borderlands, and he had ridden out to collect them. He wanted them handed over, all of them, the boss included, and he wanted them now. I understood the tip in the same breath. Dexter. The man had sold his own hired brutes to the Empire to bury the one mouth that could name him. I said as much. It changed nothing. Miles was not there to hear about Dexter, and he told me so. The bandits were internationally wanted, and the Empire had already promised them to the Talgar Federation to hand up the head of a famous crew and keep a nervous alliance sweet. There would be no questioning. There would be no Dexter. There would only be a cage and a road north. I weighed it. I weighed picking these soldiers up and setting them back outside my gate. Then I did the arithmetic that ends every version of that daydream. Beat these, and more come. Beat those, and the Empire comes. Beat the Empire, and behind it stands a whole federation, and behind that, a town of 1,000 souls who came here because it was safe. So I let them take him. They chained the boss into an iron-barred carriage and rolled my only lead out through the gate, and I stood and let it happen. Sarah came and put a hand flat against my back. She said it was not my fault, and she meant it, and she was right, and it did not help. I know, I told her. I'm still weak. She started to argue that. I stopped her because I had already found the true shape of the thing, and it was not weakness the way she meant it. One strong man is still only one man. A nation does not care how hard he punches. I had spent all this time making myself impossible to ignore, and a bureaucrat with a signed paper had just ignored me. So I stopped trying to be the strongest man. I decided, standing in that ash, to make the territory itself the strongest thing, strong enough that no paper and no nation could reach across my wall and take what was mine. I learned the rest of it later, the way you learn about weather that already happened. The cage never reached the capital. Somewhere on the Great Road North, in one of the long tunnels the highway runs through, the ceiling came down. No one died. A good many were hurt, and in the noise and the falling stone and the panic, an iron carriage with a broken door is just a broken door. The Crimson Bandits walked out of it and into the dust and were gone. Here is the part I keep turning over. That tunnel was mine once. For 9 years, the Earth Magic section held those roads up, the bridges, the tunnels, the culverts under the Capitol. And when they crossed my section off the ledger as a budget waste, nobody replaced the hand that kept the stone honest. So the stone stopped being honest. The same neglect that had thrown me out here had rotted the ceiling that caged my enemy, and it opened for him like a door held by a servant. The boss did not even run far. Why would he? He looked back the way he had come, at the declining empire spread out soft and unguarded, roads failing, bridges dropping, a fat old country that had forgotten how to hold itself together. And he saw exactly what I saw. Easy country. He only made one promise, to himself and his men. Whatever else he plundered, he would never go near that border territory again. Not for anything. He had felt the wall of it, and it had thrown him over. While I was drawing my new lines in the dirt, the capital was busy eating itself, and it started at the top. The Talgar Federation sent its ambassador, and the man did not come to sympathize. An escaped crew of famous killers lost off an imperial road. It was, he let them understand, an embarrassment a great nation did not tolerate in a client. The alliance itself might no longer be worth the trouble. While the prime minister was on his heels, the ambassador named his price. Open the market. Strike down the old law that kept the Federation's great chain stores out and protected the little shops and the tangled web of small traders who had fed the empire for generations. The prime minister agreed on the spot. He did not negotiate. He sold off the country's own shopkeepers to a foreign giant in one sentence, the way a frightened man throws cargo off a sinking boat. And he thanked the ambassador for the chance to do it. Then, having knelt to the nation above him, he turned around to find someone below him to blame. He came down on the court magic minister. The transport had been the minister's to run, and it had failed, and someone would answer for it. The minister, pale, promised there would be accountability, which meant, as it always means in that building, that the minister went looking for a smaller man to hand it to. The blame rolled downhill the way water does, always finding the lowest floor, and the lowest floor had Miles standing on it. The minister passed it to his deputy, a smooth, careful man named Dalton, and Dalton did not try to carry it. He set it down exactly where it would ruin the least protected person in the building, which was the bureau chief who had overseen the transport, Miles. And Dalton was thorough. He fed the newspapers a story, and the story was almost true, which is what makes the best poison. The bridges are falling, it said. The tunnels are collapsing. And why? Because this man, this Miles, drove out the last Earth Mage in the Empire and called the work a budget waste. I have to stop on that because it is the whole thing folded small. The words that put me on a cart to the borderlands, budget waste, a line crossed off a list, those exact words were now the rope around the neck of the man who had said them. The public had cheered when the section was cut. They did not want to remember cheering, so they took the pointing finger the paper handed them and they aimed it at Miles, and they called him the reason their roads had failed, and it was easier than admitting they had asked for it. Miles broke. He had only ever done what the crowd wanted. He had never had a thought the crowd did not hand him first, and now the crowd was devouring him for it. He begged Dalton for a way out, and Dalton, who had already privately written him off as a dead man, gave him a beautiful lie to die chasing. There was one way to cool the public's anger, he said. Go and bring the Earth Mage back. Go and fetch Shade, and put the roads right, and the story ends. So Miles packed himself off toward the borderlands, cheerful again, certain that a worthless, discarded subordinate would weep with gratitude to be summoned home. He carried an offer in his pocket. One position had been approved in the budget, one, at a day laborer's dispatch wage. And behind him, Dalton watched him go and shrugged him off as a man already fired. Then, almost as an afterthought, the deputy filed one small thing away for himself, my name. By the time Miles reached my gate, I had finished the triangle. I had already joined the first base to the third with a rail line while the bandit business was still going. Once that worked, I did not see the point of stopping, so I laid two more, first to second, second to third, and closed the three bases into a triangle of track, every corner an hour from the other two. Tanner the merchant stood on my new platform and turned in a slow circle and called it a splendid thing. Then he did his merchant's needling. In the capital, he said, they would call that third line pure waste. Why build a road between two corners when both already reach the center? I told him that was exactly the capital's disease. A strong country builds a mesh, not a wheel with the crown at the middle, so that everything inside moves easily and everything outside drags. The capital had built a wheel, and now, he told me, even the spokes were rotting, the radial roads unusable, the bridges down, the tunnels caving, all of it since they abolished the section that a man like me used to run. Tanner grinned and said the thing I did not want said out loud. The capital was finished. It was the age of Byram now. That annoyed me, and I told him so. I did not want the whole Rain Empire in the ground. I only thought the capital had probably earned its grave, buried under 9 years of everyone pretending after a lost war. But if the center did fall into chaos, witch hunts, the ugly things frightened countries do, then I meant to have somewhere clean and strong standing ready. I told Tanner, plainly, that I intended to make Byram the new capital, and that when I did, I would need a merchant exactly like him, so he had better stay close. He declined the picnic I offered, said he wanted to run and fetch the new goods I had ordered before someone else did, and bustled off delighted. Because that was the other thing about that day. It was supposed to be a picnic. Sarah had come out of the back in soft clothes, with her hair up and her glasses on, told me I was not remotely ready, and stood on her toes to fix my coat, while the girls hollered from the yard that I was slow and we were leaving without me. Pebble bounced at the gate. I was, for one ordinary hour, a man about to take his people to sit in the grass. Then the commotion started at the gate, and there was a horse where no horse is allowed, and on it, smiling down at me like 9 years had never happened, was Director Miles. He had ridden straight in past my checkpoint, over the rule that says no man brings a horse through that gate, because rules are for the people you outrank. And in his head, he still outranked me. He got down grinning and delivered his good news like a gift. The Parliament, in its generosity, had decided to take me back. I could be a court earth mage again, on a daily contract, paid by the day like a hired hand, but back, and surely that was more than a discarded man dared dream of. I said no, not a long no. I told him I had already begun building here, that I had gathered people who counted on me, and that I was not going anywhere. Please go home. The smile went brittle. He tried the next card, and it came out as a threat wearing a favor's clothes. The bandits I had caught, he said, had escaped when a tunnel fell, a tunnel that had been mine once. And so, really, when you thought about it, this whole mess traced back to me, and I was obligated to come back and set it right, obligated to return and save his job. He did not put it that plainly. I am putting it plainly for him. You really do have thick skin, Sarah said. She had come up beside me, and she was not soft now. She laid it out for him in front of the whole yard, that this was the man who had crossed me off a list as a budget waste, who had thrown me out here to a monster wasteland to save a few coins, and who had now ridden all this way to beg the waste to come rescue him. She told him Shade had said he was staying, and that he could listen once and learn. He kept talking. That was his mistake, though it was a small one next to the horse, because the men of my hunting squad had watched a stranger ride an animal through their gate without clearing the checkpoint, and my squad does not care what title a man shouts. They closed around him, they took hold of him and brought him down off the horse and onto his own 2 feet on my ground, and they held him there, and that broke him open. The director was gone in a breath. He wept. He pleaded. He had a wife, he said. He had children. He did not want to be fired. He had only done what everyone told him to do. For one moment, I will give him this one moment and no more, because I was watching his face and it was all there to read. I think he finally understood the machine he was caught in. I think the words came back to him. Budget waste. He had said them the way you cross a line off a list. Easy. Certain. A small man being tidied away. And somewhere north of here, another careful man with a pen had crossed Miles off the same list, in the same voice, for the same reason. And now the line that had been me was standing in armor it could not touch, and the line that had been Miles was on its knees in the dirt. That is what I imagine went through him. I did not ask. I looked at him a while. There was no heat in it. I did not hate him. You cannot really hate a thing that only ever moved when the crowd pushed it. But I did not owe him a single day of my life either. And the offer he had ridden all this way to make me, one position, a day laborer's wage, take it and be grateful. That offer told me everything about what the capital had left in it, which was nothing. It even eased an old guilt I had been carrying about the million people back there. A country that could only value the man who held its roads up at a hired hand's daily rate had already decided what it was worth. I did not have to save it from itself. I told the squad to take him into custody, not thrown out, kept. Then I turned my back on the capital for what I understood. Standing there was the last time. Sarah was watching me, and under the fierceness, there was a small anxious thing in her face, the question she would not quite ask, whether I might still, in some corner of myself, want to go back. I told her what I had told Miles, only I meant it for her. Didn't I say? There's already something important here. She let out a breath she had been holding a long time, and the fierceness came back, warmer now. Marlon and the girls were staring at the whole scene with their mouths open. baskets forgotten in the grass, and I did not want their picnic ending on a weeping man in chains. So I clapped the dust off my hands and told everyone I was sorry for the commotion and that we still had somewhere green to be, and let's go. The yard broke into a cheer. We stepped over the baskets, picked them up, and went, leaving the Empire's last errand kneeling behind us, come 9 years too late to matter. We left the matter of the director behind the walls and went to have a picnic. That was the whole decision. There was a man in my custody who had once crossed me off a ledger, and there were 100 things I could have been doing about him, and instead, I put on a plain coat and let Sarah straighten the collar of it and walked my household to the station like it was the only thing in the world that needed doing that day. Maybe it was. Marlon led the way up the stone stairs, calling back over his shoulder for the girls to slow down. They did not slow down. They went up 2 steps at a time with the basket swinging between them, and Pebble came thumping after. And when one of them leaned too far over the platform edge to see the tracks, Marlon's voice cut across all of it. "It's dangerous! Stop that!" They stopped that for about 4 seconds. Nora walked at the front beside him, flat-faced, saying nothing, carrying the largest basket as if it weighed nothing. The whole outing was her fault, in a manner of speaking. Sarah and I had planned a quiet day, just the two of us, and Nora had overheard the word picnic and repeated it once in that dead-level voice of hers. And by the next morning, the entire base had decided it was invited. I had not corrected them. I found I did not want to. The train sat waiting at the platform, and it was not the rattling thing we had started with. This one ran on stored magic light, quieter and smoother and faster, and I had reserved the first car for us alone. The girls poured into it and pressed their faces to the glass. Pebble climbed up last, careful with his weight on the step, and settled on the floor with a low, pleased rumble. Sarah dropped into the seat beside me and looked out at the walls we were leaving. "You brought half the town," she said. I told her half the town brought itself. The train ran out past the wall and into the wild, and for a while there was only rock and scrub, and the long, empty land I had first walked into with one pickaxe, and a sentence about being worthless still ringing in my ears. Then the land changed. It came up on the right side first, and one of the girls saw it and went silent, which was the strangest thing of all, because those girls were never silent. She just lifted her hand and pointed, and the others crowded to the window, and then the whole car was quiet in a way that made me look up from Sarah's shoulder. Fields, not a field. Fields the way the sea is water. The farmland ran out from the tracks to the far edge of sight. Black turned soil and green rows laid out square and clean. 6,000 steps to a side, and then 6,000 more. A grid so large the eye gave up trying to hold the end of it. There were figures out among the rows, small as seeds themselves, bent to the work. There were water channels catching the sun in long silver lines. There were storehouses at the crossings, and carts on the service lanes. And past all of it, the roofs of the settlement rising in tiers. Up the slope where nothing but marsh and monsters had been. This fed over 10,000 people now. Every mouth of it, grown here, on land the Empire had thrown away as too dead to bother measuring. "Wow," one of the girls breathed. "So beautiful. Amazing," said another, and pressed both hands to the glass. I did not say anything. I had built each piece of this with my own 2 hands, and I still had not, until that exact moment, seen the whole of it laid out at once from above and moving. It is one thing to dig a channel. It is another to watch a country you were told did not deserve to exist roll past a train window and refuse to end. Sarah's hand found mine on the seat. She did not look at the fields. She looked at me, looking at them. "You did this," she said quietly. I told her a lot of people did this, but my voice came out rougher than I meant it to, and she let it stand, and neither of us said anything else until the fields finally gave way to the shine of open water ahead. The lake had been a murky swamp the last time it mattered. I had drained it, edited the muck out of the water with the workbox until only the clean part was left, and walked away caked to the shoulders in the rest. Now it lay flat and clear under the sun, and the far bank held a green line of trees, and it was, without argument, a good place to spend a warm day. The girls were in it before the baskets were down. Sarah went off behind the rocks to change, and when she came back, I lost the thread of whatever I had been saying to Marlon. She had a swimsuit on under her clothes, pale, with fine lace and small flowers stitched along the edge of it, and without her glasses, her eyes were just her eyes, bright and a little uncertain. "Is it weird?" she asked, and folded her arms and unfolded them. I told her she looked wonderful. I meant it plainly, and it landed harder than I planned. Her whole face went pink, and she said something I did not catch, and turned and walked straight into the lake to hide it, which is a difficult thing to do with dignity, and she managed it anyway. I made floats out of the workbox for the ones who could not swim. plain wooden rings that bobbed high and held. Marlin took one with the grateful care of a man who did not trust water. The girls fought over the rest. Then there was a sound like a dropped anchor, and Pebble was gone. "It's sinking!" a girl shrieked, delighted. "Pebble's sinking." He was. Golems, it turns out, do not float. He had walked off the shallow shelf with perfect confidence, and simply kept going, and I could see him down there through the clear water, stubby arms still moving, walking along the bottom as if he might just cross the whole lake on foot. I built the biggest float I had made yet, a broad wooden raft of a thing, and got it under him, and hauled him up streaming and blinking. He sat on it in the middle of the lake, entirely content, and let out a long, low, happy rumble that meant, as near as any of us could tell, that everything was perfect. The girls climbed on with him. I stood in the shallows with the sun on the back of my neck and watched my strange collected household make an ordinary racket on a lake I had cleaned with my own hands. And I did not, for once, look for anything to fix. At noon, Sarah spread a cloth on the grass and started pulling sandwiches out of the big basket, and they were hers, made that morning while I was still asleep, and there was no ceremony to how fast they disappeared. The girls ate with their feet still in the water. Marlin ate like a man who had once gone a long time without eating and had not forgotten it. Nora ate in exactly 4 neat bites and said the bread was good, which from Nora was a standing ovation. Pebble did not eat, on account of being made of stone, but he came and sat with us anyway, dripping, because sitting with us was the point. "It's more lively with everyone," Sarah said, watching them. "I don't mind. It's better this way." I handed her the last of my sandwich and told her I had come around to thinking so too. I want to be clear about what that day was. It was not a reward I had been chasing. For a long time, I had not believed days like it were available to a person like me in a place like this. That was the part I had not said out loud to anyone yet. I was, right then, sitting on a blanket by clean water with a full belly and people I would kill for. And I was still half braced for someone to arrive and tell me I was not permitted to have it. Nobody arrived. The only thing on the horizon was more of my own land. After lunch, I got up and walked. I went around the far shore toward the eastern forest, where the trees stood close and dark, and the monsters ran stronger than anything we had fought yet. I was not going in. I just wanted to look at the edge of the next thing. Behind me, the noise of the picnic faded, and ahead, the wood stood there full of everything I had not built yet, and I stood at the line between the two and thought about how much of the world was still on the other side of that tree line. I heard her come up beside me. She always knew where I went. "The monsters east of here are dangerous," Sarah said. "Don't go in without me." I told her I had no intention of going in today. Then I told her the rest of it, because she was the one person I told the rest of it to. I wanted to push east for resources, I said. Timber, or whatever the deep wood was hiding. I wanted to seat more bases past the forest and run the rail out to link them until the whole territory was one connected thing that fed itself and defended itself and answered to no ledger in the capital. Food first, then iron, then independence, real independence. The kind a failing empire could not cut with a stroke of a pen. And past all of that, farther out than I usually let myself look, there were other powers in the world, federations larger than the empire that had thrown me away, and one day the border of my quiet land was going to touch theirs. I did not say much about that part. It was a problem for a version of me that had first finished the parts in front of him. Sarah listened to all of it without interrupting, the way she does when she has decided the thing you are actually saying is underneath the words. And then I stopped talking about railways. There had been a belief I carried most of my life, a hard, useful thing I had built as a young man out of watching hollow adults abandon every good cause for a warm chair. I had decided that in a country like ours, wanting anything soft was a mistake, that having a family, raising children into a rotting empire, was like keeping pets in a house you already knew was going to burn. It had kept me from hoping. It had kept me safe. When Sarah had asked me for a future once, I had answered her with a condition, some line about waiting until I had made this place the strongest thing in the empire, as if I needed to earn the right to want her. Standing at that tree line, I could not find the belief anymore. I looked for it the way you check a pocket for a key. It was gone. I had built a place that did not throw anyone away, and a man cannot go on believing the house is doomed while he is standing in a home he made with his own hands. I took her hand. "Sarah, I said. Build a future with me. She went very still. I was not going to wait for a strongest territory. I was not going to make her a promise with a lock on it. I want to share a life and a family with you, I told her. Not when it's finished, not when I've proven something. Now, here, this. For a moment, she just looked at me, and her eyes filled, and I thought absurdly of every version of this I had talked myself out of. Then she laughed, wet and bright, and pressed herself into me and held on. Yes, she said into my chest. Let's build a life together, a family, with lots of children in it. We stood there a long while at the edge of the dark forest, at the edge of everything still unbuilt, and I let myself want all of it without flinching for the first time I could remember. Behind us, the lake was loud with the people we had already gathered. Ahead, the wood held the rest of the world, patient, waiting its turn. Both of those things were true, and neither of them frightened me. I had come to this land as a line crossed off someone's list. I was leaving that day as a man with a home, a household, a whole country grown out of dead ground, and a woman who had chosen me before any of it existed. It was, in every way that had ever mattered to me, a new beginning.